Night has always been one of the most gentle moments in the world of Pokémon. As you lie back in your own bed, somewhere far beyond your room, the regions of Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn are quietly dimming, their roots and cities softening under starlight, while Sinnoh, Unova, and Kalos let their last battles fade into memory for the day. Further still, Alola, Galar, and Paldea breathe out together, as if the entire Pokémon world has decided it is finally time to sleep. For every loud stadium cheer in Galar, there is the hush of a forest in Johto. For every bright battle animation, there is the still surface of a lake in Sinnoh that barely ripples under the moon. Tonight, we are not following trainers racing toward power or legendary catches, and we are not counting damage numbers. Instead, settle in, close your eyes, and let the world slow down around you until even the most powerful creatures feel small and distant. Legendary Pokémon are usually introduced as forces to be feared or worshipped, guardians of time, space, dreams, and weather. But what makes them so interesting is how quiet they become when the day is finally over. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are no longer sparks of a storm, just distant shapes gliding against the clouds. Ho-Oh's rainbow feathers lose their glare and turn into soft, muted color. Lugia folds those great winged hands around the sea as if tucking it in for the night. This is not a story of glory or victory. There will be no last-second catches, no desperate attempts to keep a weak team alive against a legendary creature that refuses to stay in the ball. Instead, we are going to treat these Pokémon less like bosses and more like old spirits in familiar places, half-remembered myths that wander through the edges of your thoughts as you drift off. Usually, legendary Pokémon arrive in flashes of light, orchestral music, and the kind of tension that makes your palms sweat on the controller. And yet, that same creature can feel oddly harmless when you picture it. Simply standing on a quiet cliff at night, Kyogre is no longer a disaster in the making, just a vast shape turning slowly under calm water. Groudon is nothing more than a sleeping outline beneath cooled rock. So, settle in, close your eyes, and imagine we are walking slowly through each region, not as trainers seeking power, but as quiet visitors. We will pass towers where Ho-Oh once circled, lakes where the revived beasts of Johto once ran, and skies where Rayquaza still cuts a thin line between stars and clouds. Placed together, these legends become less like a challenge and more like a slow, continuous lullaby. There is no need to remember names, stats, or signature moves. If a detail slips away, you can let it go without feeling helpless or frustrated. We are simply going to let calm facts and gentle images wash over you, one legendary at a time, until the world of Pokémon fades into the background and sleep quietly evolves from the edges of your thoughts. And as we begin this slow walk through legends, the only task left for you is to listen, breathe, and let the night take over. And as we begin this slow walk through legends, the only task left for you is to listen, breathe, and let the night take over. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine the word legendary softening a little around the edges. In the games, it can sound like a label for raw power, for unbeatable creatures that dominate every battle. But here, half asleep, it becomes something quieter. A way of talking about Pokémon that feel like stories the world itself is telling. These are the beings that do not blend into the tall grass or the water's surface. They sit just outside everyday life, like distant lights on a horizon you never quite reach. What makes a Pokémon legendary is not only its stats or its frustrating catch rate, though trainers certainly remember both. It is the sense that each one is almost alone, sometimes truly one of a kind, tied to myths about time, or the seas, or the balance between storm and silence. For every ordinary Pidgey or Tentacool, there is an Articuno or a Lugia, watching from somewhere high or deep, shaping the world without needing to show up in every route. Placed together, these strange outliers make the regions feel like they have secrets older than any Pokédex entry. As children, or as newer trainers, legendary Pokémon often felt less like actual teammates and more like rumors that wandered through playground conversations and early internet pages. Someone had a friend whose cousin had caught Mew under a truck, or unlocked a hidden cave with a code nobody could quite remember. Back then, these creatures were distant goals, hovering at the edge of the cartridge, half fact and half bedtime story. And now, lying in the dark, those same tales can circle back as something gentler, like remembering a ghost story that never really wanted to scare you. Each region hides its legends in its own quiet way. A bird of ice sleeping on a forgotten island, a guardian of the seas resting in the deep, a trio of weather gods drifting above clouds or beneath waves. Imagine them drifting in the current of their own myths, not rushing anywhere, not in a hurry to battle. Mountains, oceans, ruins, and skies become slow, breathing places where these creatures wait, not for trainers, but simply for the world to keep turning under them while you sleep. This is not a story of glory or victory, not tonight. There is no need to remember exact base stats or abilities or who counters what. The numbers can stay fuzzy and out of focus at the edge of your thoughts. What makes legendary Pokémon so interesting is how easily their details blur into feelings instead. A sense of cold air, or distant thunder, or a rainbow flash across the sky after rain. And yet, even the strongest legends can feel oddly helpless once the console is off. Reduced to soft shapes in your memory, content to drift there. So, we'll move slowly, one region at a time, letting the names and places wash over you without effort. We'll begin where the series began, in Kanto, at the very start of the Pokédex, where three famous birds once felt impossibly strong and impossibly far away. But as the night deepens, you may find that even Zapdos, Moltres, and Articuno have a softer side than trainers were ever told. So, settle in, close your eyes, and let Kanto shrink down to something small and gentle, a region that once felt enormous, now resting in the palm of your hand. The noise of battles and the shouts of trainers fade away, until what's left is just a narrow path at twilight, leading you toward a quiet shape at the edge of a forest. At the end of that path, imagine a tiny shrine, half forgotten, lanterns hung like soft, sleepy stars beneath the branches. The wood is old, the stone is worn, and yet the whole place feels looked after, as if some careful creature has been sweeping the fallen leaves away, one by one, for years. The wind moves through the trees without urgency, brushing past the paper charms, making them tremble just enough to prove the world is still there, but far away, safely distant from anything loud or sharp. Kanto's legendary Pokémon are few compared to the swarms that would come later. And what makes Kanto so interesting is how simple its myths feel in hindsight. No gods of time, no rulers of space, no dragons rewriting reality, just three birds and a quiet guardian of an island sea. Iconic enough that even their silhouettes once seemed to hold impossible power. For every sprawling creation trio in later games, there is this first, modest set of legends, small enough that you can hold all of them in your thoughts at once without effort. This is not a story of glory or victory, so the shrine does not ask you to battle, or prove anything, or throw a single Pokeball. Instead, it invites you to imagine where these legendaries rest when no one is watching. What lonely cliffs and empty caves they return to when the last trainer logs off for the night. Rather than counting how strong their signature moves are, we'll drift through what they are said to guard. The storms they calm, the mountains they circle, the seas they leave almost untouched except for a passing shadow. You won't travel by footsteps here. There is no need to hurry. You move like a thought, like a slow breath, lifting from the shrine and sliding over the tree line, as if the whole region were just a painted map you can cross in a single, weightless glance. Imagine them drifting in the current of the sky instead of the water, your mind carried from one quiet domain to the next, never quite arriving, never quite leaving. Above that stillness, 3 shapes are waiting, more patient than any restless trainer. One trail of frost, one flicker of fire, one jagged line of light, each bird once introduced as the master of ice, of lightning, of flame. And yet, tonight, they are not roaring storms or terrifying forces, just distant silhouettes gliding through a calm, dark blue canvas. You're occasionally beating their wings with the lazy rhythm of creatures that know no one is challenging them. As the lanterns at the shrine grow dimmer, we'll rise to meet them, one by one, starting with the coldest feather on the quietest wind. The coldest feather on the quietest wind belongs to Articuno, and as the shrine lanterns fade, the mountains themselves seem to lean in to listen. This is not a story of glory or victory, no desperate battle for experience points or frustrating attempts to catch a roaming legendary. Instead, it is a slow glide over snow and stone, where the only sound is the soft crunch of frost settling into place. Far above the tree line, Articuno moves as a gentle, gliding shape, more suggestion than solid creature. Its wings stretched wide over peaks that most trainers will never reach. Its long tail drifts behind it like a brush stroke of pale blue ink. And with every slow, unhurried beat of those wings, the air cools, not with a violent blizzard, but with a hush, as if the sky itself has decided to whisper. Some Pokédex entries talk about it creating blizzards, but what makes Articuno so interesting is the way later descriptions lean into quiet. Feathers that trail snowflakes, not roaring storms. A presence that turns harsh cliffs into something almost gentle. Placed together, these 3 Kanto birds look like a storm broken into pieces. Articuno for snow, Zapdos for lightning, Moltres for fire-bright skies at dusk. For every crack of thunder, there is the muffled silence of falling snow, and Articuno sits firmly in that stillness, the calm phase of a storm that has forgotten how to be loud. It is part of a legendary trio, yes, but it always feels like the one least interested in showing off its power, the quiet sibling at the edge of the battlefield who would rather glide past than engage. The Pokédex likes to mention lost travelers, the ones who wander too far into icy mountains and find themselves surrounded by white in every direction. In those entries, Articuno appears out of nowhere, a blue shape in a white world, and yet the scene never quite feels like a threat. Instead of a predator circling something helpless, it reads more like a guide, a distant lantern in bird form, leading people back toward safety without ever asking for thanks, or even for them to fully remember what they saw. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine lying in the snow beneath it, perfectly warm despite the ice, as if some gentle ability you never learned in battle is quietly protecting you from the cold. The mountains are silent, the world is small, and overhead, Articuno passes by again and again, tracing lazy circles as the sky shifts from hard daylight into a soft twilight blue. No timers, no turn order, No pressure to act. Just a legendary Pokémon that for once is not here to test you, only to exist above you, like a moving constellation. Imagine them drifting in the current, not of water this time, but of air and weather and old myths. The three birds circling different corners of the same wide sky. Where there is snow, there is also thunder waiting beyond the horizon, a faint, distant rumble that suggests another shape, sharper and less patient, is carving jagged lines through the clouds and ready to trade the hush of Articuno's snowfall for something far less forgiving. That rumble does not have to be frightening, though. It can stay at the edge of the map, like a sound effect from another route that never quite reaches you. Zapdos is that feeling of thunder heard through thick walls and closed curtains, the sharp part of the storm politely kept at a distance while you settle in, close your eyes, and listen to the weather work itself out, somewhere far away, over some empty field or lonely sea. In the trio of Kanto's birds, Articuno feels like the quiet beginning, the sky cooling and softening, while Zapdos is the moment everything wakes up. The active electric phase where clouds stack higher and higher, and the air forgets how to sit still. What makes Zapdos so interesting is that, for all its jagged wings and needlebeak, its legend often happens above the point where trainers can really see it. A creature of outlines and flashes, rather than close-up encounters, more rumor than regular guest in any battle you actually fight. Its Pokédex entries talk about storm clouds gathering around it, about lightning bolts that answer its call, and yet those same clouds can drift over silent towns at night, only murmuring now and then. Zapdos is tied to power plants too, those strange buildings at the edge of the map that feel important and abandoned at the same time, humming away beside dark water, cables stretching out like roots. For every roaring stadium full of cheering trainers, there is a fenced-off transformer yard, where only the wind, a few weak streetlights, and one impatient bird are awake. Imagine them drifting in the current of the upper air instead of the ocean. Storm fronts sliding slowly over regions you once crossed as a child in pixelated rain. You might picture lightning as violent and sudden, but from far away it becomes something else. A flicker behind thick clouds, like someone briefly turning on a light in a distant house, and then changing their mind. Zapdos rides those hidden currents, a calm silhouette folded into the cloud bank, letting the storm do the loud work while it simply glides, waiting for the right moment that never quite comes in your sleepy version of the story. This is not a story of glory or victory for Zapdos tonight. Its legendary power is reduced to a gentle background track, the soft electronic buzz of old machinery, and the faint roll of thunder that feels more like breathing than threat. Even its spiky feathers, so sharp and theatrical in battle, can be imagined as nothing more than ruffled plumage catching static in the dark. A slightly overdramatic creature posing for an audience of empty fields and quiet reservoirs. Placed together, these distant storms and forgotten power plants turn Zapdos into something almost comforting. A reminder that even the loudest weather eventually moves on. And somewhere beyond that cleared sky, after snow has fallen and lightning has wandered off to grumble over the horizon, there is still one more bird waiting. Not the harsh white of ice, not the sudden white of a lightning flash, but a slower, warmer color, like the last glow of a sunset that refuses to leave the edge of the day. And if Zapdos is the storm's heartbeat, then what comes next might just be its final, sleepy sigh. That last sigh belongs to Moltres, the warmest shadow of the storm, gliding in not as a raging inferno, but as a bird painted in the colors of evening itself, the kind of gentle glow you see when the sun is almost gone and the world feels like it's taking a breath. This is not a story of glory or victory. Instead, it is the story of a legendary flame that has learned how to whisper, how to soften its own edges, until it feels more like a blanket than a blaze. Moltres is usually described as a bird of fire, but here it can be something quieter, a creature whose wings are not harsh streaks of neon flame, but long, slow ribbons of orange, red, and gold, fading at the tips into a dim, smoky violet that looks like the first hint of night. What makes Moltres so interesting is how easily that image can change once the volume is turned down, and the same fire that might terrify trainers in a battle becomes, at this hour, a moving sunset, drifting along the curve of the sky, leaving behind only softer and softer light. Placed together, these three birds feel like a weather report, told as a lullaby. Articuno as the falling snow, Zapdos as the crack of lightning, and Moltres as the final fiery phase of the storm, when the clouds have already emptied themselves and now only glow faintly from within. You can imagine the rain having already passed, puddles still and reflective, while high above, Moltres traces the undersides of the clouds with a dim ember color, like coals that refuse to go out. Not quite bright enough to disturb anyone, just present enough to say that the sky remembers what happened. In the legends, Moltres is said to appear at the end of winter, to melting snow and bringing early spring. But even that can be softened into something small and almost domestic, more like a quiet caretaker than a dramatic savior. Instead of roaring across the heavens, it can simply pass over a frozen hillside, its heat barely more than a sigh, the snow loosening its grip, dripping in patient, measured drops, making room for new grass and weak early flowers that do not yet know how fragile they are. For every harsh storm that tears through a region, there is this gentle, almost apologetic follow-up, a legendary bird tidying up the weather's mess. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine watching Moltres from far below as the day ends. Its trail of fire already toned down to a soft woolen glow, like the last line of sunset clinging to the horizon. At first, the streak behind it is clear and bright, then slower, thinner, dimmer, until it stops looking like fire at all and more like a memory of warmth. And finally, it fades completely, leaving only small, distant stars that do not care how strong any Pokémon might be in a battle. And yet, that might be the calmest part of this little legend. Even a powerful creature like Moltres can feel like background decoration in a world that is settling down to sleep. Just another shape, passing over lakes and roofs and quiet routes where weak water Pokémon are drifting in the dark. For every roaring clash of trainers and teams, there is a night like this, where Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are reduced to silhouettes and reflections, their power folded away like wings at rest, making room for the softer stories still to come, as the legends move from storm and sky into deeper, stranger myths. So we stay with them for a moment longer, these three shapes in the dark, and let them soften even more, until Articuno is nothing but a drifting line of pale snow in the sky. Zapdos is a distant, harmless flicker of thunder, with all the sharp edges filed down, and Moltres is a slow, smoldering sunset that never quite burns, just glows at the rim of the clouds. This is not a story of glory or victory. Not tonight. Placed together, these birds feel less like separate bosses on a checklist and more like a single, gentle storm stretched out over hours, as if the weather itself decided to move in slow motion so trainers could watch without worrying about a battle. Articuno is the quiet beginning, The first cold wind and soft snowflakes that make the world feel muffled and far away. Zapdos is the middle, when the sky growls and flashes but never truly frightens. And Moltres is the end, the warm, ember-colored sky, after the worst has passed. And yet, in this version of Kanto, they are just three calm presences circling the same sky, their power turned down to a whisper. What makes Articuno so interesting is how intimidating it once felt. Waiting deep in the Seafoam Islands, guarded more by slippery floors and wandering wild Pokémon than by its own AI. A legendary creature that could still be caught by a determined child with enough Ultra Balls and patience. Zapdos, lurking in the power plant, looked like pure voltage and danger. But in practice, it could be frozen in place by a single missed attack, or a well-timed status move, a spiky thundercloud that sometimes forgot how to be threatening. Moltres, shuffled between Victory Road and later Mount Ember, often felt like the third sibling trying to keep up. Strong on paper, but strangely awkward, in a region overflowing with better fire types. For every terrifying memory of a failed capture or a reset, after knocking one out by accident, there is a softer memory where they become part of the background of childhood, more like moving constellations than opponents. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine that old save file you never finished, where the legendary birds are still waiting, not frustrated, not offended, just frozen in that endless moment before you press A. They were challenges once. Now they're silhouettes you can visit whenever you like. Imagine them not in cramped battle screens, but perched on distant cliffs, or resting on wide, slow-moving clouds, watching over Kanto while the region sleeps below, the water around the islands barely rippling, the cities dimmed to scattered pixels of light. Articuno cools the air so the night stays crisp. Zapdos hums softly in the power lines so nothing shorts out, and Moltres keeps a faint warmth on the horizon so the dark never feels completely empty. Imagine them drifting in the current of the upper sky, weak only in the sense that they no longer need to prove anything. And as Kanto rests under this quiet, three-part storm, another region to the west is turning over its own legends, where a rainbow phoenix circles ruined towers, and three beasts born from tragedy and rebirth begin to stir, ready to trade snow and thunder for fire, rain, and the long echo of a distant roar. So now, the storm over Kanto quiets, and the camera of your mind drifts outward, past the cliffs and harbors and the last lonely lighthouse, until the whole region becomes a soft cluster of lights behind you, sinking into the dark like a ship going to sleep. Ahead, there is only water, a broad, black sheet that barely ripples, and the sky above it, where the same stars that watched Articuno and Zapdos and Moltres now watch you slide silently towards somewhere older and somehow heavier with stories. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine this little crossing as a slow surf animation stretched into an entire night. The weak splash of each wave against the hull, almost comical compared to the power of the creatures you've just left behind. For every roaring Gyarados that can churn the sea, there is a tiny tentacool that bumps uselessly against the boat, and yet, even these frustrating Pokémon become part of the lullaby, part of the gentle reminder that not every presence on the water is meant for battle. The further you go, the less you see of Kanto's neon edges, until at last a new outline begins to appear on the horizon. Johto doesn't arrive with fireworks or towering cities. It appears first as a low, dark shape, then as a line of hills, and then, as your eyes adjust, as a region of spires and eaves, of pointed rooftops and narrow silhouettes that look more like shrines than stadiums. What makes Johto so interesting is how much of it seems to lean upward, as if the buildings themselves are trying to speak to the sky, not through screens or speakers, but through wood, stone, and the slow ring of distant bells. This is not a story of glory or victory. Instead, Johto's legends feel like stories someone might murmur over tea, half remembered and softened at the edges. Here, legendary Pokémon are less like weapons and more like old guardians of specific places, tied to towers and burned beams and the way rain smells on ancient roofs. Their tales are woven through fire that once consumed a great building, through rainbow light that refuses to fade, and through resurrection, where helpless creatures in the wrong place at the wrong time are said to have been given new life and new power. In the center of this region stands Ecruteak City, and in the center of Ecruteak, two towers, or rather, the memory of two. One still rises, tall and quiet, its bells ready to carry a single clear note across the rooftops, while the other is only a charred frame, a skeleton of what it was, open to wind and starlight. Placed together, these two shapes feel like a before and after image, one watching the present, one haunted by what happened there long ago, each holding a different kind of legendary presence, one more visible, one almost entirely of feeling. Imagine them drifting in the current of time, the three beasts said to have fallen in that fire, then revived, now racing through storms and auroras, while high above, something brighter circles. You will meet those beasts soon enough. But first, there is a softer vision to follow. Not a battle cry, but a memory. A rainbow phoenix, Ho-Oh, gliding once over the ruined tower, leaving only a trail of color in the smoke, and a story that Johto has been quietly telling ever since. Ho-Oh is not a creature of thunderous entrances or violent storms. It is remembered instead for the way it moves slowly, almost ceremonially, above the old tin tower, circling in wide, patient arcs, while its rainbow feathers scatter soft light across Ecruteak, like stained glass poured out over rooftops and cobblestones. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of quiet color after smoke, of a sky that refuses to stay gray forever, even when the ground below still remembers the heat. As it passes overhead, each feather seems to catch the sun at a slightly different angle, sending out panes of red, gold, green, and blue that slide gently over the tiled roofs and narrow streets, touching the worn wood of the tower itself with shifting patterns that look almost like reflections on water. For every roaring dragon that splits the heavens, there is this slower, older rhythm. A legendary presence that does not need to prove its power in battle, because its very flight feels like a promise that the worst day a city ever knew will not be the last word. What makes Ho-Oh so interesting is the story whispered under that beautiful light. Long ago, when the tower burned and 3 Pokémon perished in the flames, it did not simply watch the smoke rise and drift away. Instead, it descended through the ash and ruin and revived those fallen creatures, turning tragedy into the beginning of something new, so that Raikou, Entei, and Suicune could run from that moment, like 3 living memories of loss that somehow learned how to breathe again. And yet, trainers often focus more on their stats, on which one is best in a frustrating matchup, forgetting that each one started as something helpless, on the floor of a ruined shrine. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine lying on the tower's wooden floor long after it has been rebuilt. The old beams creaking softly, the scent of incense and age in the air, while above you, Ho-Oh circles in slow silence. The colored light leaks through the gaps in windows, drifting over your hands, your face, the polished planks beside you, moving like a gentle tide as the phoenix shifts its wings, so that the whole room feels as though it is breathing in time with those distant, deliberate wing beats. In that stillness, Ho-Oh becomes less a single Pokémon and more a symbol borrowed from older myths, echoing the Japanese phoenix that appears in times of peace and disappears in times of turmoil, always tied to cycles that turn endings into beginnings. Its long tail feathers trail behind like a painted comet, its crest and plumage arranged in a way that suggests fire without violence, renewal without noise, as if the universe itself occasionally sends down a reminder that even what burns can be rebuilt, even what falls can evolve into something gentler. Placed together, these details make Ho-Oh feel less like a weapon and more like a quiet guardian of second chances. Somewhere under that same sky, the three revived beasts still roam, each one carrying a piece of that old night in its stride. Raikou with the flash of the first strike, Entei with the heat of the flames, Suicune with the water that should have come sooner, but now purifies what remains. Imagine them drifting in the current of the region's roots and fields, distant and untouchable, while above, the rainbow arc passes again, watching. And if Ho-Oh can return once to a burned tower, you might wonder, as the colors fade and your thoughts start to blur, what other legends might be quietly circling, just out of sight, waiting for their moment to step out of the clouds next. As your thoughts drift from that rainbow arc, they settle, almost without trying, on what waited beneath it after the fire. Because the story of Ho-Oh in Johto is not just about flying away into the clouds, it is also about what was left behind in the ashes. In the burned tower, three nameless creatures fell, weak and helpless, in a disaster they could never battle against. And yet, the legend says that Ho-Oh returned, spread those shimmering wings, and breathed life back into them, as Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. For every towering dragon that bends the skies, there is a quieter legend shaped by loss, by the simple idea of being given another chance. And what makes these three so interesting is how each one carries a piece of that moment forward. Raikou took the lightning that split the tower, turning it into a constant low rumble of distant thunder, power that no longer destroys buildings, but just rolls gently across the horizon. Entei took the flames that devoured the wood and rafters, turning them into a steady warmth, like a hearth that never quite goes out, comforting rather than consuming. Suicune took the water that failed to arrive in time and purified it, becoming a clear reflection on a lake, calm, cool, and endlessly patient. In the games, these revived beasts do something almost childishly frustrating. They run away. Now trainers spend long minutes, even hours, chasing them across the tall grass and roots of Johto, watching them appear on the map, only to flee after a single turn in battle, as if they are politely declining every invitation to actually participate. It can feel helpless to throw a weak ball, see them break free, and then watch the screen fade as they vanish again, leaving only footsteps on the Pokégear map and a sigh from the player. And yet, when you settle in, close your eyes, that same mechanic becomes strangely soothing to imagine. Instead of a creature refusing to be caught, you can picture three silent guardians on patrol, padding over hills, slipping past forests, crossing rivers without a sound, always moving, never quite stopping anywhere long enough to disturb the peace. Placed together, these roaming sparks of lightning, embers of fire, and threads of water feel less like a chase and more like a slow, endless migration. Suicune, especially, turns that restless wandering into something almost meditative. Its lore ties it to purifying water, and the games show it stepping lightly across the surface of ponds and seas, as if the waves themselves are solid ground. It is easy to imagine it on a still, moonlit surface, each footfall leaving the water clearer than before, the reflection of the night sky sharpening with every step, until the line between Pokémon and starlight almost disappears. Raikou becomes that soft growl of a storm you know will never quite arrive, a background hum that lets you sleep. Entei is the quiet crackle of logs in a fireplace, a reminder that fire can be gentle, that not every flame wants a battle. Suicune is the mirror that never ripples unless it chooses to move, a guardian that cleanses without demanding attention. Imagine them drifting in the current of Johto's nights, not through the ocean, but through roots and meadows, circling the region in a loop that never ends. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of watchfulness, of three revived shadows keeping their distance while the world goes on. And as Johto's towers and roaming beasts fade into the background, it feels natural to follow that quiet patrol out toward deeper water, to another guardian who does not pace the land, but instead sleeps beneath the waves, holding the sea itself in its careful, folded wings. So we sink with that patrol, leaving stone and thunder behind, and let the world above blur into a soft, distant shimmer, as if Johto itself is turning into a memory while you drift downward through colder, darker water. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a quiet descent, a slow exhale. As you settle in, close your eyes, and follow the last traces of light into the deep. At first there is only blue, then a heavier blue, then almost nothing at all. Just a dim suggestion of shapes where rock and water meet in patient silence. Imagine them drifting in the current. Loose strands of seaweed, a few weak little fish that would never impress trainers in a battle, all slipping aside as the path narrows into an underwater cavern. The ceiling presses low, the walls bend inward, and the sound of the surface fades until there is only the muffled hush of the ocean and something slower, steadier, like the breathing of the sea itself. There, in that hollow of stone, Lugia rests. Its long body curls gently around the heart of the cave, head bowed, eyes half closed, wings folded in toward its chest like a creature hugging the ocean close. What makes Lugia so interesting is that, for all its legendary power over storms and tides, its design leans toward the soft and almost parental. Those wings are not sharp blades or jagged fins, but broad, pale shapes that look surprisingly like hands, as if they were always meant to cradle rather than crush. Designers have even described Lugia's wings as arm-like, almost like great, careful palms that could wrap around a child or shield a helpless Pokémon from the roar of a raging sea. And yet, in the games and stories, this same gentle guardian is the one who calms the legendary birds when their power grows too wild, in the quiet mediator who slips between Articuno's frost, Zapdos's lightning, and Moltres' flames and simply tells the weather to behave. For every reckless burst of storm from that Kanto trio, there is Lugia, somewhere beneath the waves, ready to pull the sky back into place. If you listen here, in this imagined cavern, you can almost hear it. The soft rush of distant currents, the occasional low groan of shifting rock, and over it all, Lugia's slow, even breathing, a rhythm that makes time feel stretched and harmless. It is easy to forget that this peaceful creature could summon whirlpools or shatter cliffs. Down here, it is just another sleeper, Another guardian who would rather keep the world calm than show off its strength. And then, a small pattern breaks the stillness. A faint tremor in the water. A suggestion of pressure changing far above, as if something older is turning over in its own sleep beyond Johto's borders. Because placed together, these guardians form a path, and Lugia's quiet cavern points us outward, toward a sea that does not end at any region line. Beyond this resting place lie other forces that shape the weather itself. Not just storms in a single sky, but rain that never stops, sunlight that bakes the earth, and a dragon that threads the air between them. As Lugia dozes on, we are drawn gently toward Hoenn, where the next legends wait in the clouds and the trenches, still listening to the same endless water. As that endless water stretches away beneath us, settle in, close your eyes, and let yourself drift just a little farther from the details and closer to the feeling of it all. The story is still moving forward, but for a moment, you are not walking or flying or surfing. You are simply floating, like a quiet, invisible traveler, gliding through a sky that feels as soft as sleep itself. Notice your breathing, the gentle in and out, like waves that never hurry. With each breath, imagine yourself rising a little higher above the map of the Pokémon world, until the regions we visited so far become shapes and colors, rather than routes and cities. Down there, Kanto's legendary birds are no longer sharp, dramatic figures in a battle. They are 3 tiny points of blue, yellow, and red light, flickering in the dark, like distant lanterns left on for late trainers. Articuno is just a cool shimmer now, a pale feather of ice against the night. Zapdos is no longer a spiky, frustrating threat. It is only a soft pulse of electric gold, blinking on and off like a sleepy street lamp. Moltres doesn't roar with fire. It only leaves a faint trail of warm orange, as if the sunset itself forgot to go home. Placed together, these once imposing creatures look almost weak from here. Small decorations pinned to a much wider sky. Farther along, Johto's tower and its phoenix fade into view. But even Ho-Oh, with all its stories of rebirth, feels quieter from this distance. The legendary beasts that once dashed across the land like restless storms are reduced to 3 calm sparks. One the color of lightning, one like cooled embers, one like clear water running under moonlight. What makes Suicune so interesting is that, from up here, its perfect, flowing grace is just another smooth curve of light, tracing the edge of a lake. Beneath the waves, Lugia curls around itself like a sleeping thought. The guardian of the seas reduced to a pale outline, arms folded in an underwater embrace. And yet, it does not feel helpless. It feels content, as if even a creature that can command storms understands that this is not a story of glory or victory tonight. This is a story of watching power from far away, until it becomes gentle enough to fall asleep to. If some of the facts already feel blurred, if you can't quite remember which bird came first or how many times those beasts were revived, that is perfectly fine. That soft forgetting is part of sinking into sleep. The way a shoreline disappears when the fog rolls in, leaving only the sound of water and the sense that something is still there, even if you can't name it anymore. Imagine them drifting in the current below you. All these legendaries that once filled screens and strategy guides, now just quiet shapes resting on land in towers, under oceans. You bob slowly on an invisible tide in the sky, rising and falling with your own breathing, safe above it all, untouched by battle, untouched by time. Ahead, just past the edge of this calm, The outline of another region begins to appear, half hidden by clouds and sea spray. Hoenn waits there, where the very seas and continents and skies are drawn by sleeping giants, where for every small, weak fish there is a vast creature that writes the weather itself. But we'll meet them softly, one by one, as the waves of this story carry you onward, and your thoughts drift further out to sea. So now, as that outline of Hoenn sharpens, the scene slows down and grows quieter, like the volume of the whole world has been gently turned down a notch. You can settle in, close your eyes, and picture the region arriving not with fanfare, but with the soft hush of tide and wind. A place where even legendary Pokémon seem to respect that it's time to sleep. Hoenn is all coastline at first glance, a long, uneven ribbon of land traced by moonlight, with black rocks breaking the surface and gentle waves lapping against them in a steady, almost metronome-like rhythm. Far off in the distance, volcanoes glow faintly under the stars, not erupting, not threatening, just breathing out a dull red warmth that flickers against the low clouds and reminds trainers that this is a region where the ground itself can stir. Between sea and shore, between that dim lava glow and the cool, dark water, the air feels held in place, as if even the wind is listening. In this stillness, Hoenn's legendary trio waits, not as showpieces of raw power, but as a kind of quiet equation. For every crashing wave, there is a rising continent. For every stretch of empty sky, there is something ancient watching over it. And what makes Hoenn so interesting is how these three forces are tied together. Kyogre is the sea, Groudon is the land, Rayquaza is the sky. And placed together, these creatures are less like individual battlers and more like pieces of a weathered, sleeping puzzle that keeps the region from tearing itself apart. In the games, of course, they do clash, and the world can feel one step away from being flooded or scorched, which is exciting when you're awake and thinking about battle and stats and signature moves. And yet, this is not a story of glory or victory tonight. Instead, we'll imagine that those storms have already passed, that the last raindrop has fallen, the final tremor has faded, and all three of them have finally mercifully gone to bed. No primordial sea, no desolate land, no howling gusts from on high, just three sleeping gods, each in their own layer of the world, breathing slowly in the dark. We'll start where the light disappears first, deep in the ocean, where Kyogre drifts through black water that even lanterns' glow can't quite reach. A vast outline, barely moving, like a forgotten submarine that chose dreams over duty. From there, we'll rise to Groudon's domain, the solid ground and quiet volcano slopes where that heavy, stubborn creature can lie still for centuries without so much as a twitch. And finally, Hoenn will lift into Rayquaza's high, quiet sky, above the clouds and even above the weather, where the air is thin, the stars are close, and a single green shape coils around the planet like a protective thought. Imagine them drifting in the current of time itself, not battling, not roaring, just existing. Each one a reminder that even the things that once threatened to drown or burn the world can have a soft side when night falls. As you follow them, layer by layer, you'll hear their stories unfold slowly, like distant myths, told through the movement of tides and clouds and constellations, until, somewhere far below the surface, something enormous finally stirs, and the ocean around Hoenn takes its first, deep, legendary breath. Down where that breath finally settles, the surface of Hoenn's sea falls away, and you are invited to sink with it, layer by layer, into a vast, dark blue quiet. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine the light above you, fading to a soft, distant memory, until there is only the slow pull of the current and the soundless rhythm of something enormous sleeping in the dark. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of staying very still. At the center of that stillness rests Kyogre, the sea itself given shape, its broad body rising and falling, like the tide that has forgotten how to be rough. For every sharp-toothed Sharpedo or turbulent Gyarados that thrashes and roars for trainers in battle, there is Kyogre, simply existing. A reminder that water does not have to be violent to hold power. Its fins drift with each invisible breath, and with every slow exhale, a ring of tiny bubbles escapes, climbs a little way toward the surface, and then gives up, as if the ocean is too heavy to leave. What makes Kyogre so interesting is that, in the stories, it is part of Hoenn's great weather trio, forever balancing sea and land and sky, with Groudon and Rayquaza. People talk about torrential rain, endless storms, and flooded coasts, and yet, down here, that same legendary creature feels almost weak in its helpless calm, like a storm cloud that has already emptied itself. Instead of crashing waves, there is only the gentle sway of currents, the kind of motion that cradles slow Magikarp and drifting Tentacool, creatures that never asked to be impressive, only to float and survive. Around Kyogre, the deep ocean hums with a muffled quiet, the kind of silence where even your own thoughts seem to move more slowly. Bioluminescent Pokémon flicker in and out of view, little Lantern and Chinchou, and nameless deep-sea shapes, their lights blinking like stars in reverse, scattered beneath you instead of above. Imagine them drifting in the current, forming constellations that only the ocean can read, tracing faint outlines along Kyogre's fins, then gliding away again, as if afraid to disturb its sleep. Somewhere, in the oldest layers of myth, there is a mention of its primal form, a version of Kyogre that once swelled with raw, overwhelming rain, stretching the sea over everything it could reach. But that memory feels distant now, thinned out by time and low tides, like a bedtime story told about someone else. The markings on its body still glow faintly, a quiet echo of that era, but they pulse more like a heartbeat than a warning. And even the ocean seems relieved that this creature has chosen rest over rage. Far above this sleeping water, beyond the ceiling of waves and the drifting ships and the weak, frustrating little fish that trainers ignore on their way to stronger catches, another force of nature lies still in its own darkness. Beneath the crust of the land, where magma cools and stone presses against stone, something just as ancient waits in another kind of slumber, shaping the continents one slow dream at a time, until the balance between sea and soil stirs again. Down in that darkness, far below the weak, frustrating little fish and the restless tides that keep them drifting, Groudon sleeps like a stone that learned to breathe. It is not a restless sleep. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture a vast cavern of red and black, where the walls are not quite solid, and thin rivers of magma move so slowly that they look almost still, glowing like a distant fireplace at the end of a long hallway. The air is heavy, the light is soft, and in the middle of it all, this huge creature is curled in on itself, plates of armor pressed gently against warm rock. Around Groudon, the earth feels less like a prison and more like a blanket. The magma doesn't roar or explode. It seeps and sighs, slipping through cracks, tracing patient paths beneath the crust, as if the planet itself were dozing. This is not a story of glory or victory, not a tale of clashing weather trios in some dramatic battle. Instead, It is the quiet middle chapter, where the land simply exists, heavy and dependable, while everyone on the surface forgets what is holding them up. Gruden represents that land, the continents themselves, the solid ground that most trainers never really think about. For every roaring Kyogre wave that threatens to swallow the shoreline, there is Gruden's unmoving bulk beneath your feet. The second piece of Hoenn's weather trio, answering water with stone. And yet, what makes Groudon so interesting is how easily its power is misunderstood. In legends, it can expand continents, summon harsh sunlight, and turn oceans into fields and deserts, which sounds terrifying when you imagine it as a weapon pointed at helpless towns. But if you slow the story down, if you strip away the battle and the noise, that power becomes something gentler. The slow lifting of islands from the sea, the steady platform that lets forests root, cities rise, and sleeping people rest without drifting away like ships. Imagine walking outside at night when everything is quiet and placing your hand on the ground. The soil is cool at the surface, maybe a little rough, maybe packed from a day of footsteps and wheels. But beneath that thin layer of dust and stone, there is depth. If you listen long enough, you might almost feel a slow, steady heartbeat. Far below, not sharp like a startled Pokémon, but deep and patient, as if the planet were breathing in hours instead of seconds. Placed together, these tiny surface sounds and that imagined pulse turn the earth into something alive, something watching over you, even as you drift off. Down where Groudon lies, that heartbeat is the only rhythm that matters, ticking away eons as calmly as a metronome left on a shelf. Above it, the seas roll and complain. The weak fish flail and splash. Trainers argue about which legendary has more power in a battle, and clouds slide past without ever knowing what holds the world steady. And somewhere even higher than that, above the waves and the cliffs and the drifting ships, another creature waits in thinner air, a guardian of sky and ozone and green light, watching both sea and land together, keeping their old argument from ever going too far. Up there, where the air thins and the blue of the sky quietly fades toward black, that guardian finally has a name. Rayquaza is not a roaring dragon crashing through cities or a showy mascot demanding attention. It is a long, green shape, coiling through the highest layers of the sky, far above clouds and storms. A quiet line of scales and light that almost no trainers will ever truly see. For every crashing wave of Kyogre or trembling fault line from Gruden, there is Rayquaza, simply circling, simply waiting. What makes Rayquaza so interesting is that its role is almost disappointingly practical for such a dramatic creature. When Kyogre and Gruden let their powers clash, when water rises and land splits and the whole region seems ready to tear itself apart, Rayquaza descends, not to win a grand battle, but to tell both sides to calm down. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of a mediator, a sky serpent that steps between sea and land and, with a single appearance, turns a world-ending argument into a reluctant truce. Its long, segmented body and looping, ribbon-like trails echo old myths of sky serpents and dragons that control weather, the kind of legends where a single movement of a tail can bend the wind, or a slow twist of the body can turn a storm aside. And yet, Rayquaza is not a show-off. It spends centuries in the ozone layer, drifting where sunlight is harsh and air is thin, content to let the weaker creatures below worry about rain forecasts and frustrating little showers, while it watches in patient silence, only stirring when balance is truly in danger. Settle in, close your eyes, And imagine lying on a rooftop at night. The city sounds far below, and the air just cool enough to make you pull your blanket a little tighter. Above you, stars sit in their careful patterns, and then, very slowly, a faint green line begins to move across that field of points. It doesn't flash, it doesn't dive, it doesn't even seem in a hurry. It just glides, a quiet underline drawn across the sky, there and gone again, before you can quite decide if you really saw it. Pattern interrupt. Now picture that same rooftop, but with the sea on one side and a vast stretch of land on the other. Kyogre and Gruden brooding somewhere beyond the horizon, while Rayquaza keeps both in its peripheral vision. Placed together, these three form a simple, almost childlike diagram of the world. Sea below, land rising out of it, sky arched above. Many legendary groups work like this, built around elements that feel easy for a sleepy brain to hold. Whether it's birds of ice, lightning, and fire, or golems of ice, rock, and steel. Sea, land, sky, water, ground, air. Imagine them drifting in the current of your thoughts as you doze, and each element sliding into place, each legendary finding its quiet role, until the whole planet feels neatly stacked and softly guarded, waiting for the next story to unfold just beyond the horizon. From that neat little stack of elements, Hoenn offers one of the clearest pictures, almost like the region was designed to help your sleepy brain file everything away. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine Kyogre, Gruden, and Rayquaza, not as forces tearing the world apart in battle, but as three quiet layers of a planet that has finally decided to rest for the night. No alarms, no weather alerts, just a world that has finished arguing with itself. Kyogre is the deep ocean made into a creature, a vast, heavy shape of blue water and glowing lines, usually summoned to flood the world. But tonight, it simply drifts in the abyssal dark. It is the weight beneath everything, the helpless feeling trainers get when a storm rolls in, and there is nothing to do but wait it out, turned into a single, sleeping Pokémon. Above it, Groudon is the solid land, the crust and continents and stubborn rock. A red, ridged body that normally splits the ground but now just lies still, as if the whole tectonic plate has decided to take a nap. Then, high above both, Rayquaza is the sky given a long, sinuous outline, looping endlessly through the stratosphere, except in this version, it has finally curled up, ringed around the planet like a green scarf. Placed together, these three are a cross-section of Hoenn's world. Ocean layer below, land in the middle, sky on top. Three bands of color and power, stacked so gently that even their old arguments feel far away. What makes this trio so interesting is how loud and dramatic they are in the games, and yet, how soothing they become when you freeze them like this, caught between one breath and the next. They echo so many old stories of gods of sea, earth, and heavens, fighting over climate and balance. But this is not a story of glory or victory. This is the part after the myth ends, when the gods are tired and everyone quietly agrees to stop shouting. For every legend of roaring tempests and blinding sunlight, there is this softer version, where the same creatures just don't bother. They let the rain fall where it will, let the land stay as it is, let the wind drift without orders. If you picture the planet sliced open like a gentle diagram, you can place each legendary into its own layer. Kyogre far below, glowing faintly in the silent pressure. Gruden wedged into the thick, warm rock. Rayquaza stretched across the thin blue air, eyes half closed. Imagine them drifting in the current of time rather than water. their once destructive power reduced to background noise, like distant thunder you can barely hear from bed. There is something oddly comforting about pretending that such forces are watched over, even if only by data on a cartridge and stories in a guidebook, because it turns random weather and shifting ground into parts of a guarded system instead of chaos. And Hoenn, being Hoenn, does not stop at one carefully arranged trio. Hidden in caves and ruins, the Golem trio waits as well, those blocky guardians of ice, rock, and steel that look almost too stiff and clumsy to threaten anyone, as if they might trip over their own feet before they ever reach a trainer in battle. They are there in the dark, patient, and a little awkward. And as you drift toward the next chapter, Hoenn still has more doors to open, more quiet legendaries to uncover at a slower, dreamlike pace. So the journey lingers in Hoenn, where the noise of battles and crowded routes falls away, and the map quietly points you towards something slower, older, and far less eager to impress anyone in a fight. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of walking, of waiting, and of doors that would rather stay shut unless you treat them with an almost sleepy kind of respect. You stumble, almost by accident, onto a low, weathered ruin tucked into a corner of the region that most trainers hurry past, because there are no obvious rewards, no sparkling water, no experience-rich battles. The walls are plain, the sky is ordinary, and yet the ground is marked with strange dots and lines, a braille inscription that refuses to explain itself at a glance. To even begin, you have to slow down, read carefully, move in odd patterns, and perform small, almost ritual steps that feel more like a meditation than a puzzle. Inside, each sealed door waits with stubborn patience, as if testing how long you're willing to walk in circles, to stand still, or to bring a weak, oddly specific creature just to satisfy an ancient instruction. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine it. No roaring legendary theme, no sudden flash of overwhelming power, just the quiet click of stone, the soft grind of mechanisms, and a gentle awareness that something very old has finally decided to acknowledge you. Beyond one door, Regirock rests in its dim chamber, a golem of stacked boulders and uneven limbs that looks like it might trip over its own feet before it ever reaches a trainer in battle. Beyond another, Regis stands like a jagged pillar from a forgotten glacier, a blocky icicle that seems more suited to chilling the room than dominating any arena. And in the last, Registeel waits, smooth and metallic, a rounded, hollow thing that resembles a storage tank someone accidentally gave legs to. More industrial equipment than graceful Pokémon. Placed together, these three are less a strike force and more a geometric family of guardians, each one a locked door given a body. What makes them so interesting is how they echo the old idea of golems and ancient constructs from real-world myths, beings shaped from stone or clay or metal, created not to roam freely, but to stand watch over a temple, a treasure, or a secret that most people will never even learn exists. They are protectors of silence, not performers of strength. Imagine the echo of your footsteps in those chambers, the cool air brushing past. The way sound seems to fall flat against their unmoving forms, as if the room itself is holding its breath. You are alone with something very old and still, a weak conversational partner, perhaps, but a powerful reminder that not every legendary needs to shout about its importance. And yet, Hoenn's three are only the beginning. Somewhere to the north, in Sinnoh's colder lands, new runes, new shapes, and a fourth, unexpected guardian are already waiting to shift this quiet little trio into something stranger. And the door to that story is only just beginning to open. So before that door opens all the way, settle in, close your eyes, and let the noise of battles fade into the background, like distant waves against a shore you can barely see. This is not a story of glory or victory now, not a tale of catching or conquering, but a quiet moment to imagine every legendary we've met so far simply resting. Picture the Kanto birds first, those storm-colored creatures that once felt like impossible prizes to young trainers. Articuno is not sweeping through blizzards tonight. It is perched high on a glassy cliff of ice, wings folded, head tucked, resting, watching, breathing, waiting. Zapdos is not tearing open the sky with lightning. It slumbers on a twisted power line, feathers drooping like tired sparks. Moltres curls its flame-like wings around itself in a dark cavern, fire dimmed to gentle embers, more nightlight than threat. Then, let your thoughts wander to Johto's beasts, the ones who used to sprint endlessly across old cartridge maps, frustrating to track and helpless to pin down. Raiku's thunder is only a low purr now, as it sleeps in tall yellow grass. Entei's volcano heart is a slow, steady warmth, not an eruption. Suicune lies by a still pool of water, mane drifting on the surface like mist. The world reflected around it, resting, watching, breathing, waiting. Hoenn's titans too are quiet. The golems sit deep in their caves, more puzzle than powerhouse, their eyes dim, their stone bodies almost part of the walls themselves. Kyogre is curled somewhere in the black ocean, a vast, sleeping shadow. Gruden is buried beneath layers of cooled rock. Rayquaza is a green ribbon in the high atmosphere, dozing in the thin air. Imagine them drifting in the current of wind and tide, not fighting, not roaring, just existing in a kind of cosmic nap. Placed together, these guardians make the Pokémon world feel strangely safe, as if every storm, every tremor, every sudden change has a sleepy caretaker assigned to it. They are strong, and yet, in these moments, their power is like a heavy blanket over the regions, holding everything in place. Even if they are only stories on old screens and bits of data in cartridges, the idea of them lying where they belong can be enough to steady a restless mind. Let your own thoughts move like those roaming beasts used to, drifting in and out of focus, sometimes sprinting ahead, sometimes circling back, sometimes just pausing to rest. If a random memory appears, treat it like a wandering Raikou on the map, noticed, then allowed to slip away again, resting, watching, breathing, waiting. And somewhere to the north of all this, past Hoenn's seas and Johto's towers, Sinnoh is waiting in the dark like a new cave to step into, where time and space themselves will have guardians. And what makes them so interesting is that even the origin of the Pokémon universe can be explored as softly as a dream you are already starting to forget. So now, as Hoenn's last waves fade into the distance, Sinnoh rises ahead like a quiet silhouette, and the path that leads into it is not a roaring battlefield, but a slow, careful climb. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture your steps beginning at the base of Mount Coronet, where the world still feels ordinary. And yet, with every footfall on the worn stone, something older and stranger starts to press gently at the edges of your thoughts. The trail coils upward in soft spirals, and the higher it goes, the thinner the air becomes an inch, until each breath feels a little lighter, a little slower, as if time itself is stretching between one inhale and the next. Down below, rivers and lakes glimmer like spilled water, full of weak little creatures that trainers rush past. But up here, the distractions fall away, and the sky starts to take over the story. The sun sinks behind distant peaks, the last orange fading, and one by one the stars appear, not as sharp pinpricks, but as a calm, velvety scatter of lights that seem to be watching back. Sinnoh is a region where the legends do not stop at storms or oceans or even the moods of the weather. For every roaring Kyogre or restless Groudon, there is a myth here that reaches further, into the ticking of unseen clocks, the invisible lines between places, and the first quiet moment when anything at all existed. What makes Sinnoh so interesting is that its grandest stories are not about winning a battle, but about why there is a battlefield, a sky, and a tomorrow in the first place. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's more like a whispered explanation for why your memories line up in order, and why the distance between your pillow and the farthest star never quite changes. Of course, words like time and space can feel huge and abstract, especially when you're already half asleep and letting thoughts drift the way weak water Pokémon imagine them drifting in the current. So here, they become gentler shapes, almost like bedtime caretakers. One looking after every second on every clock, one smoothing out every road, river, and sky, so that nothing bumps into anything else. Dialga and Palkia sit at the heart of Sinnoh's myths, not as loud, showy monsters, but as two patient figures that quietly decide whether a moment lasts a little longer or whether two distant places feel just close enough to meet. By the time you reach the summit, the world below has shrunk into a soft blur of lights and memory, and the mountaintop is almost bare. Almost. In the thin, cold air, there is a stone altar, simple and weathered, set like a forgotten puzzle piece against the stars. It does nothing. It glows with no obvious power. It only waits quietly for those cosmic guardians of clocks and distances and dreams to be remembered again, whenever someone is calm enough and tired enough to look up and wonder who first placed time and space so gently in their hands. So from that quiet altar under the Sinnoh sky, it becomes easier to imagine the ones it's waiting for, not as roaring monsters, but as patient caretakers who almost never raise their voices. Dialga, the guardian of time, is usually drawn with sharp edges and metal plates. But here, in the dark, it can feel more like a distant clock tower in a sleepy town, marking the hours not with alarms or urgency, but with the soft, steady rhythm of days and nights sliding past each other like clouds. This is not a story of glory or victory, because Dialga's work is not a dramatic battle so much as a constant, gentle chore, keeping one moment from collapsing into the next, making sure that yesterday stays behind you and tomorrow waits politely ahead. What makes Dialga so interesting is that for every terrifying legend of it stopping time, there is the quieter truth that it mostly just lets time flow. Like a river, it refuses to dam, watching over the weak and the strong alike as they drift along the same current without even realizing someone is guarding the banks. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture that river now, wide and slow, with ripples of memories and half-forgotten battles, of trainers winning and losing, and sometimes just fishing in the same old spot. Dialga does not care if a creature is powerful or helpless, if it evolves into something majestic, or stays small and frustrating forever. It only keeps the stream moving, making sure that even the most disappointing afternoon will eventually become a distant, softened shore behind you. Imagine them drifting in the current, not just Magikarp or Phoebus this time, but whole years, whole regions, sliding gently past Dialga's silent gaze. And if time is a river, then Palkia is the sky above it. Not a cold, empty void, but the comforting distance between stars, between towns, between you and the next person still awake tonight. Palkia, the guardian of space, could be frightening if you thought only of warped dimensions and torn horizons, and yet, placed together, these ideas become something softer. When you remember that space is also what keeps things from crowding each other, the quiet gaps that let every Pokémon, every little weak creature in the water or on land, have room to breathe. You can imagine Palkia taking that sky and stretching it out like a blanket, tucking in mountains and oceans and tiny flickering city lights, adjusting the distances so nothing bumps too hard into anything else. For every cramped cave or narrow route that frustrates trainers, there is a wide field, a calm lake, a starry night where the world feels just open enough. And somewhere far above, Palkia has already measured how far everything should be from everything else. Their designs may echo deities and dragons from old stories, all armor and angles and impossible power. But here they are, simply cosmic organizers, one watching the flow of moments, the other arranging the spaces between them, like two very patient librarians who never raise their voices no matter how loud the universe gets. And if time and space themselves are already spoken for, if Dialga and Palkia have taken those gentle night shifts, then Sinnoh must be hiding something stranger still. A third presence that does not sit in the river or the sky, but somewhere between them, waiting in that thin, quiet place where even legends hesitate to look for too long. So if time and space are spoken for, if those shifts are already covered, then something else has to mind the places in between, the gaps where light doesn't quite reach, and direction forgets what it was supposed to be doing. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture a world that looks like a reflection dropped onto broken glass, where islands hang sideways and waterfalls drift upwards, as if they have politely declined the offer of gravity. This is the distortion world, and it is less a nightmare and more a half-finished dream that never bothered to wake up. Here, up and down, are suggestions, not rules, and each step feels like swimming through water that isn't really there, a slow, floating motion that never quite lands. Trees grow from the sides of cliffs, then politely turn and grow from the ceiling instead, and yet nothing about it is loud or violent. It is quiet in that deep, muffled way that makes even your own thoughts sound far away. For every neat, ordered route that trainers walk through in Sinnoh, there is this hidden tangle, this sideways room at the back of reality that most people will never see, and that most Pokémon will never even know exists. In that strange silence, Giratina waits, a creature that looks like it was designed to frighten children, and then accidentally given a full-time job as a guardian. What makes Giratina so interesting is the way its reputation leans toward the monstrous, with those 6 shadowy wings and that segmented body, and yet its actual role is almost domestic. It keeps watch. Dialga minds time, Palkia minds space, and Giratina minds the leftovers, the shadows of events, the forgotten edges where broken things drift. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is the story of someone who stays behind to tidy up the echoes. Its design may seem harsh, almost frustrating in how aggressively it leans into spikes and stripes, but that sharpness hides a strangely gentle assignment. Giratina balances what Dialga and Palkia cannot touch: the distortions and discarded timelines, the misaligned reflections that would otherwise spill back into the neat, weak little roots where trainers expect their world to behave. Imagine them drifting in the current, not water this time, but a slow river of half-memories and unused possibilities, and Giratina simply nudging them back into place with one silent spectral wing. Now, place yourself there for a moment, floating through that sideways sky, Not walking, not falling, just suspended as if the whole world has become one long, slow breath. Giratina moves nearby, not charging into battle, not roaring, just gliding past like a very large, very serious escort who refuses to admit it is being protective. Its red eyes glance over, not hostile, simply checking that you have not wandered somewhere you cannot return from. And yet, in all that strangeness, its presence is oddly reassuring, like a nightlight that insists on looking terrifying. Pattern break, then. If a creature like this can feel calm once you understand its job, what else have we misread in the dark? For every cheerful guardian of the seas like Lugia, there is a shadowy caretaker, like Giratina, working the late shift where no one thinks to look. Placed together, these legends remind you that even the scariest-looking Pokémon can be caretakers of hidden spaces, quiet workers in the background of reality. And as we drift toward other guardians, toward spirits of land and sky and dream, that idea will keep returning, like a soft echo that never quite lets you feel helpless in the dark again. From those hidden workers in the dark, the legends of Sinnoh soften even further, until they become almost whispers on the surface of water. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture 3 lakes scattered across a quiet region. Lake Verity, Lake Valor, and Lake Acuity, each one still as glass under a deep, star-heavy sky, each one holding a faint, steady glow just beneath the surface, as if the water itself is thinking. There is no roar here, no storm, no loud display of power to impress trainers or threaten a battle. Instead, in each lake, a small creature drifts, more like a thought than a fighter, content to let the ripples be the loudest sound. At Lake Acuity, that glow belongs to Uxie, the guardian of memory, who is said to have given humans the ability to remember, to learn, and to keep stories, so that even the weakest moments are not wasted, just folded away for later. What makes Uxie so interesting is how unthreatening it looks. A tiny yellow figure with its eyes closed, as if even opening them would be too much effort for a legend. And yet, the myth says that anyone who sees those eyes will lose their memories, which is a very dramatic ability for something that spends most of its time hovering like a sleepy thought at the bottom of a lake. For every towering dragon that bends time or space, there is a quiet being like Uxie, doing its work by simply existing, by letting you think at all. Far to the south, Lake Verity holds Misprit, the spirit of feelings, said to have given humans the ability to feel joy, sadness, and every small emotion in between. It is a strange gift when you think about it, because in battle feelings can make you weak, can make a trainer hesitate, can make a loss sting for longer than it needs to. Mesprit itself is known for wandering away from its lake, almost like it gets bored, or like emotion can never quite sit still. And there is something gently funny about a legendary Pokémon that canonically just drifts off because it cannot commit to staying put. The third glow in Lake Valor belongs to a Zelf, tied to willpower, that stubborn determination that keeps you standing up after a frustrating defeat. Azelf is said to have given humans the strength to act on their thoughts and feelings, so that memory, emotion, and resolve are all connected. 3 parts of the same quiet engine inside your chest. Placed together, these 3 are less like weapons and more like a blueprint for being human at all. Imagine sitting by one of these lakes in the middle of the night, the air cold but gentle, the water perfectly still, except for that soft light below. There is no need to call out, no need to prove yourself with a strong team or clever strategy. You simply sit, and there is a calm presence beside you, one that understands every thought you have without judging any of them as weak or strong. This is not a story of glory or victory, just a moment where you realize that the same things these Pokémon once gave to people, memory, feelings, determination, have been quietly carrying you through every small battle of your own. And as Sinnoh's myths are followed back even further, past lakes and mountains and dreams, they arrive at a single, older presence, Arceus, the creator said to have shaped time, space, and even these gentle guardians. It sounds like a grand story, but even that tale can be told softly, like a bedtime legend about an egg in the dark, waiting to wake up. So, settle in, close your eyes, and follow that thought back, past the lakes and their gentle guardians, to that older presence waiting in the dark. Before trainers, before weak little water, Pokémon splashing helplessly at the shoreline, before even the idea of a battle, there is only a quiet, empty sky and something small at its center. It is not thunder or fire or a roaring sea. It is an egg, just an egg, resting in a void that has no up or down, no time to measure, no space to cross, only a soft, endless nothing that feels almost like the moment before sleep. What makes Arceus so interesting is that, in most stories, it's called the creator of everything, the one that shaped time and space. And yet, here, it begins as something so still and so simple that it barely seems like a creature at all. Imagine it drifting in the current of nothingness, turning slowly, without water, without light, without any need to hurry. There is no pressure, no frustrating early game route, no trainers waiting to test it, just patience. Then a crack appears, gentle and soundless, and from that shell a single light unfolds, like a lantern opening in the dark. Arceus does not burst out with power. It stretches, it breathes, it looks around at the empty canvas and begins to move. First, it reaches out and traces time, a thin, glowing line that lets moments finally follow one another, instead of sitting in a pile. Then, with another slow motion, it draws out space, spreading a soft web where distance can exist, where anything weak or strong could one day have somewhere to go. These are not sharp, sudden acts. They feel more like careful brushstrokes, each one laid down so nothing will feel rushed or out of place. Around its body, plates begin to shimmer into being, not as complicated battle mechanics, but as moods, as colors of that first light. A calm blue, like water on a windless day. A deep green, like forests that have not yet grown. A muted silver, like steel that hasn't been forged. For every fierce, aggressive type that will later dominate a competitive match, there is a softer one that simply exists so the world can feel complete. Placed together, these aspects turn Arceus into a moving spectrum, rather than a single, fixed shape. This is not a story of glory or victory, not really. It is the story of a universe being arranged, like a room before guests arrive, each star and mountain and ocean set down with the same patient care someone might use to place a blanket over a sleeping friend. Arceus shapes the stage, then steps back, letting other legends, other weaklings and wonders grow into the spaces it has made. And as Sinnoh's creation feels quietly finished, like a book gently closed, the light of Arceus fades into the background, making room for legends that are less cosmic and more earthly, spirits of wind and rain and wandering islands, waiting just beyond the horizon of this calm, empty sky. So with Arceus dimming like a lantern turned low, the stage feels suddenly wider, calmer, and strangely empty, as if the whole sky has taken a slow, deep breath. In that quiet, settle in, close your eyes, and imagine time itself beginning to loosen around you. Not snapping or stopping, just easing gently, like Dialga has reached down and turned the speed of a river from rushing rapids into a slow, glassy drift. Minutes stop feeling sharp. They stop lining up like strict turns in a battle, and instead blur together into one soft, continuous flow. For every hurried thought that usually splashes and thrashes at the edge of your mind, there is a slower one now, a weak little ripple that barely reaches the shore before it folds back into the current and disappears. What makes Dialga so interesting is not just the power to freeze or rewind, but the idea that it can simply nudge time into a more forgiving shape, where trainers are no longer counting moves, no longer worrying about what evolves when, just floating through a long, gentle turn that never quite has to end. Around that softened river of moments, space begins to stretch in a comfortable way, as if Palkia has quietly adjusted the room you're in, pulling the walls back a little, lifting the ceiling, giving you more room to breathe and rest. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story where even the air decides it doesn't need to try so hard, where your bed feels a little larger, your blanket a little heavier, and every weak, restless twitch has more room to unfold and then settle. Imagine them drifting in the current. Your arms, your legs, your thoughts all moving, just enough to remind you they are there, then sinking back into stillness. And yet, there is one more creature watching from the edges. A shadow that is not really threatening, just patiently curious. On somewhere at the border between this calm river and that expanded room, Giratina stirs, not as a villain, but as a quiet collector of all the little worries that refuse to sleep. It gathers them like helpless, frustrating Zubat in a cave, flapping and bumping into everything, then tucks them away in a distant corner of the distortion world, where they can flap themselves tired without ever reaching you. If you're losing track now of which legendary bends time, which one folds space, which one lurks in the in-between, that is perfectly fine. In fact, it is the point. Their names can blur into soft sounds, like water against stone, like weak little cries heard from far away. Important in the daylight, but almost decorative here. Placed together, these titles and types and forms, becoming part of the same low, soothing murmur. And just when that murmur feels steady, let's tilt it, just a little. Beyond Sinnoh's vast canvas, wait Unova and Kalos, regions where guardian deities and swords of justice line up like half-asleep sentries, and where life and death legendaries, creatures that should be terrifying, instead become gentle bedtime figures. Soon, we'll wander past them one by one, not to measure their power in battle, but to let their stories unfold slowly, like distant storms seen from a safe, quiet shore. And so, from that quiet shore of earlier regions, the journey crosses an invisible line, and Unova rises up ahead, like a new kind of myth, one built from glass, steel, and long stretches of bridge instead of ancient towers alone. The skyline feels sharper here, more modern, and yet, when you tilt your head back, it is still the same old stars looking down, reflected in windows and river water, turning every lit office and apartment into a tiny, man-made constellation. At night, those great Unovan bridges glow gently, strings of lights tracing their arches, while trains murmur past and distant traffic becomes a soft, steady hum, like a different sort of ocean. Placed together, these glowing roads and clustered cities form patterns that feel almost deliberate, as if the region itself is trying to sketch out a new legend in neon and sodium lamps. It's easy to imagine the legendaries here, not just hiding in caves or deep forests, but standing somewhere above the highway lights, watching the movement of trainers below like a slow, thoughtful tide. What makes Unova so interesting is the way its legendary Pokémon lean into ideas as much as elements. In earlier regions, a creature might simply rule over water, or wind, or time. Here, the stories reach for justice, for truth, for ideals, as if the myths have grown up alongside the cities. For every simple storm-bringing bird, there is now a dragon that represents a philosophy, and a guardian that quietly judges the hearts of humans trampling through the grass. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of concepts turned into calm, wandering figures. The region's legends fall into several little families, and two of the most memorable drift to the surface first: the Swords of Justice and the so-called Tau Dragons, the trio that pulls at truth, ideals, and the empty space between them. Their names might sound heavy, even a little intimidating, like something out of a textbook rather than a bedtime story. And yet, settle in, close your eyes, because we are not going to rush through them or tally their power in battle. We are going to let each idea unfold slowly, like a bridge disappearing into fog. We'll begin with the Swords of Justice, those wandering protectors of forests and plains, who feel less like perfect gods and more like slightly stern park rangers that happen to be hooved legendary Pokémon. Imagine them drifting in the current of Unova's grassy roots instead of water, patrolling the borders between wild and city, between helpless little creatures and the sometimes frustrating carelessness of trainers. They stand for justice, supposedly, but in this quiet version of the story, that justice becomes something soft and patient, a reminder to tread lightly. Soon after, we'll move on to the Tau Dragons, the embodiments of truth and ideals that, on paper, sound grand and absolute. But even those big words can be smoothed down into something sleep-friendly, turned into simple questions about what you wish for and what actually is, told through the shapes of dragons gliding over nighttime skyscrapers. For now, we'll just hover at the edge of their story, letting the glow of Unova's skyline fade into the dark, while the first hoofbeats of the Swords of Justice echo quietly in the distance, waiting for their turn to be told. Those hoofbeats don't rush in like a charge. They arrive slowly, like a heartbeat. You only notice once everything else has gone quiet. And if you settle in, close your eyes, you can almost feel the ground steady itself beneath them. The Swords of Justice sound like a squad of fierce warriors, but in Unova's softer nighttime stories, they feel more like wandering caretakers, patrolling the edges of human noise and wild silence. Cobalion walks first, not because it demands to, but because something in its calm, steel-blue gaze seems to find the path before anyone else does. What makes Cobalion so interesting is that, for all its sharp edges and armor-like plates, it's remembered less as a weapon and more as a quiet leader, a creature that steps between frightened Pokémon and frightened trainers and refuses to move until everyone lowers their guard. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of tension slowly dissolving, of a legendary simply standing there until anger has nowhere left to go. Beside it, Terrakion could easily have been framed as the blunt instrument of the group, the one that smashes walls and sends opponents flying in battle. Yet the legends that linger around it at night are softer at the edges. Terrakion is heavy, sturdy, and stubborn, the defender that plants its hooves like a boulder when caves are threatened or when herds are cornered. But placed together, these details make it feel more like a living fortress than a raging attacker, a reminder that sometimes the strongest thing a Pokémon can do is refuse to be moved at all. Viridian completes the trio with something lighter, almost musical in the way it moves, its steps described as so swift and precise that the grass barely bends beneath it. For every clumsy, frustrating encounter with a weak water Pokémon that flops helpless on the shore, there is Viridian, gliding through forests with a patience that makes the whole place seem protected. Its blades and horns more like warning signs than weapons, asking intruders to think twice rather than forcing them to flee. And then there is Keldeo, the younger one, still learning where to place its hooves, still splashing a bit too much when it runs along riverbanks. It's a water type that, in battle, can wield impressive power. But in these quieter tales, it feels more like a foal, trying on courage the way other creatures try, on new moves, practicing stances, repeating lessons, and occasionally tripping over its own enthusiasm. You can almost imagine the older three watching from a distance, not judging, just waiting for the day this small wanderer fully evolves into the role it's been chasing all along. Imagine them drifting in the current of night across a moonlit field now, 4 silhouettes moving in a slow line, hooves barely making a sound on the grass. The only noise a faint rustle as Cobalion's presence calms a nervous flock, as Terrakion's weight reassures the earth, as Viridian's stride brushes dew from the leaves while Keldeo trots to keep up. They are guardians of land and life, not conquerors. And while they walk their quiet circuits below, high above them and far away, other forces are at work. Dragons of truth and ideals, turning in the dark like distant stars. In the next stretch of Unova's sky, those dragons will unfold their wings, shaping the region's deeper myths, while the swords of justice continue their soft patrol far beneath, keeping the world steady enough for legends to be born at all. High above those quiet patrols, another legend is unfolding, not in water or wind, but in the soft, slow turning of the sky itself. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine Unova's night stretching overhead like a deep, calm lake with 3 strange shapes gliding just beneath the surface of the stars. The first is Reshiram, a white dragon of truth, but not the harsh kind of truth that stings or scolds. Its truth is quieter, more like being honest with yourself when no one else is watching. When the battle is over, the screen has faded, and a trainer is left alone with their thoughts about what went wrong and what went right. Its tail burns like a small, steady furnace, not a wild blaze, as if it's gently warming the parts of you that admit, yes, I am weak here, and yes, that is still me. Beside it, Zekrom, the black dragon of unideals, hums like distant thunder, not quite arriving, always promising that something more could be built from what already is. Ideals here are not grand speeches or loud declarations. They are the quiet plans you make before sleep, the tiny what-if that drifts through your mind about training a different team, taking a different path, letting a helpless little Pokémon evolve into something with real power one day. For every clear truth that Reshiram holds, there is an unrealized dream that Zekrom carries, and together they circle like 2 thoughts you can't quite put into words. What makes Kyurem so interesting is that it sits between them, and yet feels like it belongs nowhere. Kyurem is the empty shell, the leftover piece of a dragon that was once whole, a creature of gaps and missing warmth, like a puzzle with one piece quietly gone. Its body looks chipped and hollow, as if someone started carving a legend and then simply stopped, and leaving the ice to settle in the cracks. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of incompleteness, of the strange comfort in knowing that even a legendary can feel unfinished. Their shared tale whispers that there was once a single dragon, split into 2 opposing halves with Kyurem as what remained. The cooled ember after the fire, the drained cloud after the storm. Placed together, these three are less a team and more a broken mirror, each shard reflecting a different angle of the same hidden face. Imagine them drifting in the current of the cosmos instead of the sea. Three constellations slowly sliding past your window, each one a separate point of light and yet still part of one larger picture you can't see all at once. As you lie there, you might feel your own truths and ideals doing something similar, not fighting, just coexisting. One saying, "This is who you are." The other whispering, "This is who you might become." With a quiet, Curum-like space in between, where nothing is decided yet. That space can feel empty, even frustrating. But it is also where rest lives, where no choice has to be made tonight, where no battle has to be won. And somewhere beyond even these dragons, in another corner of the sky, other legendaries are waiting to surface. Guardians not of truth or ideals, but of things far stranger and softer, ready to reshape the night in ways Unova's dragons never could. And so, from Unova's sky, where choices hang unfinished, the journey drifts further west, over an ocean gone quiet, until another land rises in the dark. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Kalos at night, a region stitched together from forests and old European-style towns, where narrow alleys and wide plazas are all paved in cobblestone that glows softly under warm lamplight, like someone scattered little pieces of starlight along the streets. There is water here, of course, in quiet canals and fountains. But the real current that runs through Kalos is older and stranger, more like a pulse than a river. For every bright cafe window, there is a shadowed grove, and for every laughing crowd of trainers, there is a lone path slipping into the trees, where the wind sounds almost like breathing. This is not a story of glory or victory. Instead, it is a story of what happens when legends stop roaring and simply lie down beside the roots. Kalos's main legendary pair, Xerneas and Eviltal, are often described in sharp, dramatic terms: life versus destruction, creation versus ending, radiant antlers versus ragged wings. On paper, it sounds like a harsh battle, a clash of overwhelming power that would leave the whole region helpless between them. And yet, when you think of them, in the middle of this quiet night, they feel less like enemies and more like two halves of a single slow breath, the inhale and exhale of a world that knows how to begin and how to let go. Xerneas, the stag of life, is easy to imagine stepping carefully through those forests, hooves barely touching the moss, antlers lit with gentle colors, like stained glass lit from within. Trainers hear that it can share eternal life, and it sounds almost unfair, almost too strong. But what makes Xerneas so interesting is how calm it seems, like a creature that understands that even endlessness has to move at a walking pace. Eviltal, the bird of endings, is the opposite silhouette, all dark wings and a long tail that looks like a clawed branch, drifting over the region like a storm that forgot to make any noise. Placed together, these two are not just a simple good and evil pair. They are a reminder that nothing lasts forever, and that this is not always something to fear. For every seed that sprouts in Xerneas's wake, there is a leaf that falls under Eviltal's shadow, and the forest is made from both. Their designs pull from Norse mythology, from world trees and ravens and deer at the roots of creation. But here, in Kalos, they feel more like ancient spirits that never quite left the woods or the sky, watching the small, frustrating struggles of battle from a distance that makes everything softer. Deep beneath those cobblestones and forests, another legend is listening. Zeegard waits underground like a root system, a hidden guardian of balance, scattered through the soil in tiny cells that almost no one notices, connecting cliffs, rivers, and towns in a network of quiet observation. Imagine them drifting in the current of the earth instead of the sea, gathering slowly into something that only rises when the pattern above grows too uneven. Somewhere below your imagined bed in Lumio's city, under the polished stones and lamplight, that patient creature is resting, ready to remind even life and destruction that they are only parts of a larger whole, as the journey moves on to legends shaped by time itself. Up above that resting guardian, the story of Kalos unfolds more softly, with light and shadow walking through the same forest at different hours of the day. This is not a story of glory or victory, but of a creature that breathes and a creature that exhales, each one turning the same cycle in opposite directions, so gently that trainers almost forget they are supposed to be afraid. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Xerneas standing alone in a forest clearing, the air so still that even bug Pokémon seem to hold their wings. Its antlers stretch outward like branches of crystal, every point glowing with a different color. Stained glass without a window, painting the trunks and leaves in quiet bands of blue, gold, and green. With every slow breath, the weak grass at its hooves straightens, saplings thicken, and old trees that looked almost helpless a moment ago find a second spring, as if the forest itself has decided to evolve. What makes Xerneas so interesting is that it does not roar or demand. It simply exists, and in existing, it repairs. For every creature of life like that, there is another that gathers endings, and in Kalos, that role belongs to Yveltal. It is easy to imagine it as a terror, a red and black shadow tearing across the sky, but here, let it be something quieter, a tired bird drifting over a world that has finished blooming. Its wings, spread like dark branches, do not strike. They collect, drawing in the last faint sparks from fallen leaves, from withered flowers, from old Pokémon that have reached the end of their long, slow battle with time. It is not cruel, only thorough, like autumn itself. And yet, us players still meet it with a Master Ball, just in case. Placed together, these two are not enemies so much as a rhythm, like waves that rise and fall on a lake rather than the open sea. Their story suggests that life and endings are intertwined, that every bright clearing will one day dim, and that this can be comforting. Everything rests. Everything renews. Nothing has to keep struggling forever. Imagine them drifting in the current of years instead of water, one lifting, one lowering, both making sure the pattern continues. Now, imagine walking through that same forest long after Xerneas has gone, when the antlers are only a rumor told by half-asleep trainers. The clearing is empty, but the roots remember. There is a lingering warmth in the soil, a softness in the moss, like the ground itself is still holding a quiet charge of fairy-type power. The trees feel fuller, the air less sharp, and even the smallest creature seems a little less fragile, as if some old blessing never quite wore off. Underneath all of this, beneath the roots and the fallen feathers and the stories, Zeegard waits again, unseen, the system beneath the legend. Not a flashy dragon swooping in for a final battle, but a patient gardener checking the lines of the land, watching the forests, Xerneas healed, and the valley's Yveltal emptied, making sure neither side wins for too long. As the journey drifts onward, toward other legends of time and space, that quiet presence keeps its vigil, holding the world together while everyone above finally gets some sleep. Zigard is what happens when that patient gardener puts down the tools and simply becomes the garden itself. While Xerneas and Eviltal stride through stories as clear symbols of life and death, Zigard mostly lives off-stage. A quiet system running in the background, scattered as tiny cells and watchful cores hidden in caves, forests, and even deep under the water, where most trainers will never really notice it. This is not a story of glory or victory. It's a story of something that prefers to stay unseen. What makes Zigard so interesting is that, for most of its existence, it doesn't look like a legendary at all. It looks like little green blobs, weak and helpless on their own, almost like the kind of background creature you'd forget about while you focus on something more dramatic. These cells and cores drift, cling, and observe, monitoring the flow of energy in the land, the health of ecosystems, the balance between growth and decay. Placed together, these scattered pieces form a nervous system for the whole region, quietly checking if anything has tipped too far in one direction. And yet, Zigard does not rush in at the first sign of trouble. It waits, and it measures. Only when the balance of nature is truly threatened, when the land itself seems ready to break, does it begin to awaken in a way that even sleepy trainers can't ignore. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture that slow gathering. First, a cluster of cells pulling together into a small, dog-like shape. Zigard's 10% forma, still limited, still vulnerable, but no longer completely helpless. As more pieces join, the creature evolves in a very literal sense, in shifting from that lean 10% form to the serpentine 50% form, a larger guardian that coils through caves and valleys like a living fault line. It is stronger now, but the tone of it is still not that of a rampaging monster. It's more like a warning line, a visible outline of where things should be. Only at the very edge, when disaster truly looms, does Zigard reach its complete form. A towering figure assembled from nearly every cell, a final emergency guardian that appears because nothing else will keep the world from tearing itself apart. Imagine them drifting in the current. Not just Zigard's cells, but roots under soil, rivers winding between stones, clouds tracing paths above mountains. Zigard is a way of talking about that feeling that everything in nature is connected. That when the water is poisoned, the forests suffer, and when the forests burn, the skies change. For every roaring weather trio or dramatic dragon of time and space, there is a quieter legend like this, a reminder that power can mean holding things together rather than smashing them apart. In that sense, many legendary Pokémon start to look less like weapons and more like stories about balance, protection, and cycles. Each one a different answer to the same gentle question of how a world keeps going without falling over. As the journey moves on to other guardians of seas, skies, and dreams, that idea lingers in the background, like Zigard's cells themselves, watching softly while you drift toward sleep. So from that quiet idea of balance, of cells watching over a world that keeps turning, the journey slows down and asks something very simple of you instead. If you could rest anywhere in these legends, where would you like to fall asleep tonight? Settle in, close your eyes, and let the answer arrive gently, the way a weak ripple crosses still water without needing any power at all. You might choose the world beneath Lugia's ocean, where the surface is just a pale ceiling far above, and everything down here is blue and soft and slow. The sounds are muted, just a distant thrum like a heartbeat through water. And even this great guardian, who could shake storms apart in battle, moves like a careful, sleepy creature that doesn't want to wake anything. For every roaring hurricane, There is this version of the sea, thick and heavy and protective, where worries feel too clumsy and air-filled to sink down far enough to find you. Or perhaps Xerneas's forest feels safer, a place where the air is cool and green instead of deep and blue, and the only light comes from quiet points between the branches, like the glow of its antlers has soaked into every leaf. The ground is soft with moss. The colors are all dusk and twilight, and even the smallest sound is just a twig giving up and resting. What makes Xerneas so interesting is that it carries life and renewal in its story. And yet, here, it's perfectly content to stand still for 100 years, while you drift for a single night. There is another option, smaller and simpler. The edge of a Sinnoh Lake, one of the calm mirrors watched over by spirits of knowledge, emotion, and will, who are powerful but so shy that trainers barely see them at all. The water here doesn't crash or surge. It just lies there, patient and flat, reflecting clouds and the faint outline of a legendary that would rather not be noticed. Imagine them drifting in the current of thought instead of waves. Your own worries bobbing once at the surface, then sinking out of sight as if they were just another helpless, frustrating splash from a weak Pokémon you'll never send into battle. Or you might feel most at home on a quiet cloud near Rayquaza, high above the weather trio it once had to calm, where the sky is thin and pale, and the world below has turned into a soft painted map. Up here, wind is a hush instead of a force, and the long green body that once coiled through storms now loops lazily, like it has finally run out of things to fight. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is just altitude and distance, the gentle permission to let everything on the ground shrink and blur until it stops feeling urgent. Whichever place you choose, there is no wrong answer, no stat check, no right nature or perfect IVs, only 4 different shapes for the same feeling of safety. Placed together, these resting spots are like alternate forms of the same calm legendary, each one evolving the idea of comfort in a slightly different way. You can pick one and stay there in your mind, or drift between them as the minutes pass, letting the rest of this video fade into background noise, like distant trainers still moving through routes you've already cleared. If you've already begun to float away into that ocean, that forest, that lakeside, or that cloud, the journey will quietly continue without you, wandering on through Alola's islands, Galar's misty wilds, and Paldea's open fields. Somewhere out there, more guardians of time, space, and dreams are waiting to be whispered about, and when you're ready, they'll still be here, patient as ever, watching softly while you sleep. And so, that wandering path drifts south and west, over open ocean and quiet waves, until the world softens into Alola at night, a loose chain of islands resting under a bright, watchful moon. The water here barely bothers to crash. It just folds and unfolds against the shore, each wave glowing faintly with reflected starlight, while palm trees sway in a slow, sleepy rhythm that feels more like breathing than wind. If you settle in, close your eyes, you can almost hear the sand shifting as tiny, weak creatures burrow down for the evening. Alola's legends are different from the towering dragons and fierce weather gods that came before. Here, the guardians are closer, more like neighbors than distant rulers. For every colossal serpent coiling through storm clouds, there is a masked island spirit perched quietly on a cliff, listening to the surf and the distant chatter of trainers finishing their last battle of the day. What makes Alola so interesting is that its legendary protectors are not just symbols of power, but of place, of home, and of all the little routines that fill the space between adventures. On Melemele, there is Tapu Koko, a restless electric guardian who darts along the coastline like a living thundercloud, half curious and half competitive, sometimes helping, sometimes startling the unwary. On Akala, Tapu Lele drifts like a pink petal on the breeze, scattering strange, healing scales that can mend or harm depending on its mood. A reminder that even kindness can be a little frustrating when it refuses to follow simple rules. Ula Ula's Tapu Bulu moves more slowly, a bell-horned gardener of forests who can be almost comically lazy until its territory is threatened. And then, the sleepy bull becomes a sudden, unstoppable force. And on Pony, Tapu Fini wraps itself in mist, a water guardian whose trials are as confusing as they are cleansing, inviting only the patient to step through its fog. These are not gentle house pets. They can be mischievous, stern, and even a bit rude, the sort of Pokémon that might ignore a plea for help one day, and then save an entire coastline the next. And yet, placed together, these four deities form a quiet safety net over the islands, watching people and Pokémon alike with the detached affection of beings who have seen every kind of battle and still prefer the calm that follows. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of guardians who exist so that others can sleep without worrying about the horizon. Imagine them drifting in the current of daily life. Small wooden shrines tucked under leaning palm trees, smooth stones stacked near beaches, garlands of flowers left on worn steps at sunset. Children whisper thanks before bed, elders leave offerings of fruit and shells, and somewhere in the distance, a Tapu's eyes flicker, amused that such tiny gestures are still being made. For every grand temple and legendary tower elsewhere in the world, there is a simple, salt-stained altar here, half buried in sand but never quite forgotten. Above all of this, far beyond the palm fronds and the mist, something even older keeps watch. The moon that paints the waves and the sun that will soon rise over the ocean are not just lights in the sky here. They are home to Alola's cosmic legendaries, Solgaleo and Lunala, who turn slowly through space like patient guardians of day and night. Their story, stretching from the depths of ultraspace to the quiet beaches below, waits just beyond the horizon of this archipelago, ready to unfold whenever you're still awake enough to listen. Out beyond those quiet beaches, Solgaleo and Lunala move like a slow heartbeat for the whole region, turning day and night on and off with a patience that most trainers never really stop to notice. This is not a story of glory or victory, not tonight. It is simply a story of light arriving when it should, and darkness following gently behind, like two legendary creatures taking turns watching over a sleepy world. Solgaleo is supposed to be a lion of the sun, a radiant emblem of overwhelming power. But here, it's easier to imagine it in softer terms, padding along the edge of the horizon with paws made of warm, golden rays. Not the harsh noon glare that makes you squint, but the kind of light that slips through curtains at sunrise, or paints the water orange at sunset, when even the roughest ocean looks calm. For every blinding, scorching star that burns too bright, there is this steadier glow, a reminder that light can be gentle, and that even something called the beast that devours the sun can feel more like a big, sleepy guardian cat than a threat. Lunala, drifting just behind, is its mirror in the dark, a bat-like guardian of the moon whose wings seem less like limbs and more like an unfolding piece of the night sky itself. When it stretches them wide, you can almost see constellations caught in the curves, as if someone peeled a slice of space away and let it glide silently over Alola. What makes Lunala so interesting is how it manages to look both eerie and comforting at once. A creature that could easily be frightening in battle, and yet, when imagined high above, simply looks like a moving patch of stars, dimming the world just enough for sleep to feel possible. Both of them are tied to ultraspace and strange cosmic travel, able to pierce dimensions and carry trainers through impossible distances. But that side of their power can stay far away for now. Tonight, they are only the feeling of morning and night arriving on time, the quiet certainty that the sky will change colors, whether you keep your eyes open to watch it or not. Settle in, close your eyes, and you can almost sense Solgaleo, waiting just beyond the dark edge of the sea, while Lunala glides slowly overhead, tracing a path you never quite see, but always trust. Placed together, these two turn into a rhythm more than a legend, a slow back and forth that continues whether anyone is awake to admire it, or whether the world is as helpless and still as a weak Magikarp beached on the sand. Imagine them drifting in the current of time itself, Solgaleo sinking below the waves of the horizon as Lunala rises, then trading places again and again, a tide that never forgets to return. And yet, their calm, predictable dance is only one pattern in the sky. Just beyond their orbit, other legendary guardians are waiting to be noticed, each with its own quiet cycle, ready to surface as soon as you're willing to drift a little further into the dark. If Solgaleo and Lunala feel like a tide in the heavens, then Galar sits more like a quiet shoreline below, all rolling hills and worn stone, tucked under a cloudy, star-dimmed sky that keeps everything just a little muted at the edges. The region stretches out in soft folds of green, hedgerows tracing sleepy patterns, old castles and towers rising here and there like forgotten chess pieces, left in the middle of a game that ended centuries ago. Street lamps glow in small towns, but beyond them, the land feels hushed and heavy, as if even the wind has decided to settle in. Close your eyes and listen to the old stories instead of stirring up trouble. In that kind of landscape, legendary Pokémon don't feel like roaring forces of power. They feel like memories that never quite learned how to fade. Galar's twin heroes, Zacian and Zamazenta, are introduced not by thunder or light, but by statues in town squares and weathered carvings in mossy stone. Wolf-like creatures frozen mid-step, as if they might gently shake off the lichen and walk away at any moment. For every brilliant, cosmic lion or bat that commands time and space, there is a pair of canids that simply guarded a kingdom, then politely stepped back into legend once the battle was done. What makes Zacian and Zamazenta so interesting is how ordinary their loyalty sounds when told in a calm voice. Two guardians who arrived, protected, and then rested. Their designs echo knights and Arthurian tales, blades and shields and banners translated into fur and armor. But here, this is not a story of glory or victory shouted across a battlefield. It's more like a bedtime retelling of brave dogs who never left their post, who stood between helpless towns and a storm that once threatened to swallow the sky. Trainers may know them as fearsome attackers in competitive play, but in this dim, museum-light version of Galar, they are just patient sentries, almost shy about their own strength, content to let children climb on their statue bases, while the adults read the plaques in a slow, sleepy voice. And then, tucked in one corner of the legend, there is Eternatus, the massive dragon tied to the darkest day, a creature so large and strange that it bends the idea of what a Pokémon even looks like. It could be frightening. It once turned the sky a deep, unnatural red, and made the region feel small and weak beneath it, a kind of living storm that refused to drift away. And yet, the important part now is that this all happened long ago. The danger sealed, the creature contained, its wild energy folded into a neat, distant fact rather than a present threat. Imagine walking past its depiction in a gallery, the painting all sharp angles and deep colors, but the room itself so quiet that even Eternatus feels like it's dozing. Imagine them drifting in the current of history instead of water. The sword, the shield, and the dragon placed together. These three forms a little triptych of how a region remembers fear and comfort at the same time. You stroll through this imaginary museum, footsteps soft on polished floors, tapestries along the walls showing the darkest day. Not as a disaster to panic over, but as a story already resolved, the darkest threads woven neatly into the border. One panel shows Zacian stepping forward, another shows Zamazenta bracing with its shield-like mane, and in the final one, Eternatus curls inward, no longer stretching across the sky, just a contained shape in the corner of the fabric. There is no urgency here, no need to prepare for battle or worry about stats, abilities, or which move hits harder. The legends have already done their work, and you're only visiting the echoes. You can almost hear a guide speaking in a low, even tone, explaining that these creatures once changed the course of Galar's history, then shrugging gently as if to say, "But not tonight." And as you leave this quiet gallery, or the doors open, not onto daylight, but onto another dim corridor of stories, where other regions and their guardians are waiting behind the next soft turn in the hall. The corridor bends, and instead of another hall of stone and stained glass, it opens into something softer, a forest at the edge of Galar, where the trees stand like quiet pillars, and a low mist curls around their roots. This is not a story of glory or victory, not tonight. The battles and the cheering trainers are somewhere far away, as if they happened to someone else in another lifetime. Here, the air smells faintly of wet leaves and cold water, and the only light comes from a pale moon, resting on the surface of the fog. In the middle of a small clearing, two shapes lie side by side, so still they could almost be carved from the night itself. Zacian, the sword, and Zamazenta, the shield, are here without their weapons, their armor, and steel plates set neatly against the trunk of an old tree, like tools put away after a long day of work. What makes Zacian so interesting is that its whole legend is built on swift offense, on cutting through danger before it can even think to strike, while Zamazenta's tale is one of defense, of standing firm, absorbing every blow until nothing threatening remains. Placed together, these stories can sound like opposites, as if one creature lives to rush forward and the other exists only to block and endure. But lying here, they look less like rivals and more like two halves of the same slow breath. For every sharp edge, there is a soft barrier. For every quick strike, there is a patient guard. Their fur rises and falls in an easy rhythm, and every now and then, one ear twitches at the distant sound of a weak rookity rustling in the branches, or a drop of water falling from a leaf. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine resting with your back against Zamazenta's warm side, feeling that thick, protective coat under your hands, the steady heartbeat pulsing through your shoulders like a quiet drum. Zacian is just beyond, its head resting on its paws. No sword clenched between its teeth, just slow breathing and the occasional soft snore that feels almost too normal for a creature that once changed history. And yet, in this moment, they are not legends or weapons, not guardians of Galar's fate, but simply two very large, very tired Pokémon who have finally been allowed to stop. Legends usually spend so much time on the battles, on the last desperate stand or the final strike that saves the world. But they rarely linger on what comes after, on the long, healing quiet. This clearing is that missing piece, the part of the tale where nothing needs to be proved, where power is measured not in damage or defense, but in how safe you feel when you lean a little closer and let your eyes grow heavy. Imagine them drifting in the current of sleep, their thoughts as calm as the mist around them. Somewhere beyond this forest, beyond the cliffs and the faint line of sea, another region waits, with its own guardian beasts and quiet stories. Paldea, with myths of treasures buried in ruined towers, dragons coiled around ancient academies, and strange new creatures that watch over crystal-bright lands, is resting just past the horizon of this dream. We will walk there soon enough. But for now, the wolves keep watch at the edge of the trees, and all you have to do is breathe with them, in and out, until the forest and its heroes fade gently into the dark. Beyond that forest edge, the land opens, and the world feels wider again, as if the dream itself has taken a slow, deep breath. Ahead lies Paldea, not as a map on a screen, but as a broad, quiet region unfolding under the night. Long cliffs that lean over dark water, still lakes holding the last reflections of starlight, and an academy on a hill, its windows glowing softly, like a lantern someone forgot to blow out before bed. Here, even the so-called legendary Pokémon feel less like distant gods and more like familiar shapes you might glimpse on an evening walk back to the dorms. Settle in, close your eyes, and picture Koraidon resting on a sun-warmed rock, feathers and scales slack, its ancient muscles no longer coiled for battle, but simply existing. A past-era dragon that has finally been allowed to be a little weak. Then, somewhere along a neon skyline, Miraidon hums quietly, like a bike left charging in the corner. A dragon of the future whose sleek metal and circuits are strangely homely when it curls up beside you, like a mechanical pet that never quite learned how intimidating it was supposed to be. For every towering box art monster that once terrified new trainers, there is a Koraidon that just wants a sandwich, and a Miraidon that looks faintly helpless when it bumps awkwardly into a rock. What makes Paldea's dragons so interesting is the way they step down from the clouds and ride alongside you, not ahead of you, turning legendary power into something you can lean against while you watch the waves roll in. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of companionship, of engines idling softly while the world turns from day to night. Far from the academy lights, though, the land remembers older mistakes, buried tablets, a broken sword, a heavy vessel, and scattered beads once sat as silent, cursed artifacts, blamed for greed and ruin, until time and resentment gave them bodies and names. Woqian, Qianpao, Tinglu, and Qiyu. Placed together, these four sound like a fearsome warband. But in the hush of Paldea's nights, they are more like forgotten guardians, dozing at the edge of history. Their anger cooled into something quieter, their presence a reminder that even the most frustrating disasters eventually settle into dust and moss. And yet, Paldea does not treat them as monsters to be feared forever. In a region built around an academy, around lessons and field trips, and curious students jogging past weak little creatures on the roadside, its legendaries are woven into lectures about history, ruin, and slow change over time. The dragons that bridge past and future, the treasures that evolved from misused objects into living myths, all of them feel like chapters in a textbook that someone has underlined and doodled in, turning distant tragedy into something you can understand, even forgive. Imagine them drifting in the current of years, tablets sinking under leaves, swords buried in snow, vessels tilting in dried riverbeds, beads scattered in cooled lava, until only stories remain. As you listen, we will only touch them gently, as if leafing through the last pages of a storybook before sleep fully takes over, pausing on a detail here, a quiet fact there, and saving the louder tales for another night. Because just beyond these calm ruins waits one more glimmering secret of Paldea, and it changes the way every other legend looks when the lights finally go out. And when the lights finally go out, Paldea offers one more quiet surprise. Not a roaring god of space or a storm that shatters the sea, but two dragons that feel strangely like something you might curl up beside. Koraidon and Miraidon are the region's great legends, yes, but what makes Koraidon so interesting is how soft that legend becomes once it's perched on a cliff edge, feathers ruffled by the breeze, waiting patiently for a rider. Koraidon is the past given scales and plumage, a primal and feathered dragon whose muscles look built for climbing rough stone and tearing through ancient forests. Its wheels do not turn. They simply sit there, like a half-remembered idea of a bicycle, from a time before bicycles existed, and yet, trainers still throw themselves onto its back without hesitation. Miraidon, by contrast, is the future smoothed into chrome and neon, a sleek, jet-like creature whose body hums with quiet power, eyes glowing as if some distant circuit is always thinking one step ahead. For every aloof, untouchable legendary that floats above the battlefield and never really feels like a friend, there is a Koraidon, or a Miraidon, that evolves the whole idea of what a legend can be. In the games, they are not distant bosses, waiting at the end of a dungeon. Instead, they are your riding partners, your slightly awkward bicycles that happen to be dragons, your constant companions as you stumble through classes, bad item choices, and the occasional very weak early game battle. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of a mount that sometimes bonks into a low ledge before finally clambering over it. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine riding Koraidon through an ancient Paldean forest. The air damp and green. Every footfall, a soft thud on moss and roots. Its feathers brush past hanging vines, its breath comes out in warm huffs, and the world feels older, slower, almost sleepy around you. Then with a blink, the scene shifts. You are on Miraidon now, gliding along neon-lit cliffs as if the rocks themselves have become circuitry. The night air thin and cool. The wind in your hair, a steady, comforting roar that never quite turns into a storm. It can be strangely soothing to think of time this way, with the past and the future not as looming threats but as creatures that simply carry you forward. One small jump, one short glide at a time. The past is a feathered dragon that does not judge your missteps. The future is a polished machine dragon that does not demand perfection, only that you keep holding on. Imagine them drifting in the current of history, not dragging you under, just keeping you gently afloat. And yet, Paldea holds older stories still. Stories where mistakes did not become friendly mounts but sank into the soil instead. As our two dragons circle down to rest, we turn toward the treasures of ruin, those sealed fragments of ancient errors now lying still beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered as softly as a secret, whispered just before sleep. Those dragons felt like mistakes that learned to float, like guilt that learned to paddle alongside trainers instead of dragging them down. The treasures of ruin feel different, older, like regrets that sank so deep they turned into something else entirely. Settle in, close your eyes, and imagine not a friendly mount or a helpful ride Pokémon, but a curse that actually grew teeth. What makes X so interesting is that in Paldea, even hatred can become a creature. Wo-Chien is not just a snail with leaves for a shell. It is the grudge of a scholar, etched again and again into wooden tablets, until the wood itself could no longer bear the weight. For every peaceful library or quiet academy, there is a room where jealousy once simmered, and here, that jealousy pulled in dark energy like water into dry soil, until the tablets cracked and the weak, creeping snail emerged, dragging forests into withered ruin almost by accident. It is strong, but it also feels helpless, tied forever to words that should have been left unwritten. Qianpao began as a sword, or rather, many swords, shattered and melted down after brutal conflict. Their metal cooled, but their hatred still hot enough to burn. Ice formed around them, snow settled in, and the lingering fear of fallen trainers seeped into the heap until it moved. A lithe, white leopard, whose body is literally blades in snow. It looks built for battle, sleek and terrifying, and yet it is also strangely narrow, almost delicate, like a weapon that never learned any purpose beyond cutting. This is not a story of glory or victory. It is a story of leftovers. Then there is Ting Lu, a heavy vessel that once held offerings, wealth, and the quiet arrogance of those who thought the land itself could be bought. When that vessel cracked, the spilled fear of a whole nation soaked into the soil and gathered around it, building a hulking stag of earth and stone, so weighed down by its own power that every step feels like an apology. Chiyu, by contrast, is almost mocking in its smallness, just a handful of glittering beads. Greed polished smooth until it caught fire. The little goldfish of ruin that looks weak and almost cute as it swims through molten disaster. Placed together, these four are less like a team of legendary champions and more like a cautionary museum exhibit that accidentally walked away. And yet, their wild days are over. In the present, they rest in sealed shrines and quiet valleys, their power wrapped in chains, prayer tags, and respectful distance. Imagine them drifting in the current of time instead of water. Their once frustrating, violent legends now softened into background murmurs. You might picture yourself walking past one of those shrines at dusk, the sky dim, the air still. There is a faint chill, the sense that something inside could wake and unmake a forest, a mountain, a town, but it doesn't. The stones stay closed, the beads stay still, the vessel does not crack again. Even the heaviest stories in the Pokémon world, the ones born from greed and conflict, eventually settle into silence, becoming the kind of tale you only half remember as you drift off, already being carried toward gentler guardians waiting in the next region over. So now, settle in, close your eyes, and imagine that those gentler guardians have guided you higher and higher until you're floating quietly above the whole Pokémon world. The regions spread out beneath you, like soft shapes on a sleeping map, each legendary, just a tiny steady point of light resting in its own habitat. From this height, even the fiercest creatures lose their sharp edges. The storms look like slow spirals, the volcanoes like warm embers, the oceans like a calm, dark blanket. Down there, Kanto is only a small patch of coastline and forest, and Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are no longer dramatic birds tearing across the sky, but three faint glows moving lazily over sea, cloud, and mountain, as if the phases of a storm have forgotten how to be loud. Johto is a soft curve beside it, where Ho-Oh's rainbow arc becomes a pale ring of color, and Lugia's great wings fold into a single silver shimmer above the water, more like a watchful lighthouse than a weapon of battle. Placed together, these once intimidating legends feel almost shy from far away, like they know trainers are sleeping and are trying not to wake them. In Ekritake's memory, Raikou, Entei, and Suicune are reduced to three sparks pacing around the ruins. Their story of fire and revival, now just a gentle loop, repeating without urgency. What makes Suicune so interesting is how its graceful trail of water becomes, from here, a thin, soothing line, like someone quietly drawing across the surface of a pond. Your drifting view carries you onward, over Hoenn's islands where Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza no longer argue about sea, land, and sky, but simply hold their places as three balanced lights, a triangle of calm instead of conflict. Sinnoh's great myths shrink too. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina turn into slow-turning stars at the edge of your vision, while somewhere tiny, Cresselia glows like a nightlight that refuses to go out, politely guarding dreams without asking for attention. And yet, you've traveled so far in your mind already, from Kanto's birds to Johto's towers, from Hoenn's weather to Sinnoh's time and space, and you have not moved even an inch in your bed. Unova, Kalos, Alola, Galar, Paldea. The names pass by like a soft mantra, each region offering its own cluster of lights, its own dragons and guardians and half-forgotten creatures, all of them powerful, none of them demanding anything from you now. If you've lost track of who is where, or which trio does what, that's perfectly fine. This is not a story of glory or victory, and the details can blur safely at the edges. What matters is the feeling that the world continues peacefully while you rest, that these legends keep their quiet watch so you don't have to. Imagine them drifting in the current of the night, circling slowly above forests and towns, waiting patiently for the next time you decide to visit them. Because another region and another quiet reflection is still waiting just ahead, with one last invitation you may not want to ignore. So now, as the regions start to blur together a little, this is a gentle place to pause, to look back over the path you've walked with these quiet legends. From the first myths of elemental trios to the final guardians resting in distant forests and ruined towers, they've each stepped out of the usual noise of trainers and battle and settled into something softer tonight, something closer to a bedtime story than to a test of power. You've drifted past the old patterns, the birds and beasts and golems that feel like the bones of the world, each one holding a piece of storm, or stone, or starlight. The Kanto birds, usually framed as terrifying forces, became calm markers of weather instead, with Articuno's snowfall falling like a slow, silent curtain over mountain paths, more lullaby than threat. Later, the guardian deities and the weather trios, who normally drag the whole planet into their arguments, were allowed to be still, as if someone finally told them that this is not a story of glory or victory, and they listened. Along the way, a few images may have clung to the edges of your thoughts, like snow on a sleeve that refuses to melt. Lugia in its underwater cavern, wings folded, the sea above it heavy and dark, yet somehow comforting. Xerneas standing in a glowing forest, antlers lit like stained glass in a quiet cathedral of trees. Zacian's resting form, sword laid aside for once, a creature built for battle pretending, just for a while, to be weak and unbothered. Placed together, these scenes stop feeling like boss fights and start to feel like rooms you can visit whenever you need them. What makes legendary Pokémon so interesting is that, for all their overwhelming stats and frustrating catch rates, they're also symbols of stability, balance, and quiet watchfulness. For every reckless trainer rushing into another league challenge, There is a patient guardian waiting at the end of a cave. For every loud, showy move animation, there is a single, unmoving figure on a cliff, simply existing while the world turns beneath it. And yet, they're still just creatures in the end, sometimes sleeping in awkward poses, sometimes hiding in places that feel oddly inconvenient, like they, too, are a little tired of being dramatic. If you settle in, close your eyes, you don't need to hold the whole Pokédex in your head, or remember every name, type, and signature move. You only need one image, or even just one feeling. Maybe it's the hush of Articuno's snowfall, or the deep hush of Lugia's cavern, or the way that glowing forest around Xerneas seemed to breathe in time with your own. Let one of those stay, and let the rest dissolve quietly into the background, like distant waves or a town's light seen from far offshore. And if, somehow, you're still awake, you might notice a small question forming at the edge of your thoughts like a pattern interrupt in the calm. Which legendary, which realm or ruined tower, or still lake, feels most like home to you? You can hold that answer for later, to share in the comments when morning comes, or you can let it drift away like a weak little water Pokémon bobbing on the surface, helpless but oddly peaceful. Because from here, the legends won't demand anything more from you. They'll simply wait, while the next, and perhaps final, invitation arrives, ready to carry you the rest of the way into sleep. So, if you're still just a little bit awake, with your thoughts drifting but not quite gone, you might quietly choose one last companion for the night, a single legendary, to keep you company while the rest fade into the background. Not the loudest, not the strongest in battle, just the one that felt the most calming as it passed by. The one whose presence seemed to smooth out the edges of the day, rather than sharpen them. For some, that might be the ocean. A gentle guardian like Lugia, resting deep beneath the waves. A creature of water and air, whose wide wings look more like hands ready to shield than weapons ready to strike. For every roaring Kyogre or crashing Gyarados, there is a softer current, a quiet sea that only moves enough to rock you to sleep. And you might feel yourself pulled toward that, as if you could settle in, close your eyes, and hear only the hush of distant tides. Others might feel lighter in the sky, floating beside Articuno or Rayquaza, where the world below becomes small and harmless, just a painted map with no sharp corners. There are those who will always prefer the forest, where Celebi or Varetian step softly between roots and fallen leaves. And what makes this so interesting is how these supposedly mighty Pokémon become gentle background noise, like the rustle of branches that never quite turns into a storm. Some might wander back to old ruins with Regis or Registeel, these stiff, slightly awkward guardians who look powerful but mostly just stand there, patient and unbothered, as if even they have given up on impressing trainers with raw power. And somewhere far above all of that, there are the stars, where Cresselia glides through moonlight and Jirachi dozes for 1,000 years at a time, reminding you that this is not a story of glory or victory, just a slow orbit around sleep. If you're still listening clearly enough to follow these names, you can quietly pick one and hold it in your thoughts like choosing a single card from a deck and tucking it under your pillow for later. If you'd like, you can tell the world tomorrow which one you chose, leaving a soft note in the comments about your ocean, your sky, your forest, your ruins, or your stars, or even asking for a full sleep story where that one Pokémon gets to drift in the spotlight for an hour without ever needing to prove itself in battle. And yet, there is no rush, no quest, nothing urgent waiting on the other side of the pause button. If you're already drifting, half asleep or further, there is nothing you need to do at all. The screen can fade, The video can end or loop quietly in the background, and the weak little sounds can wash over you without asking for attention. Imagine them drifting in the current of your thoughts. All these legends and almost legends placed together. These creatures forming a soft circle around you as you lie down in whatever realm you've chosen. You might be on a cliff above the sea with Lugia watching the horizon, or under a ruined tower where the Reggie trio stand like slightly confused statues, or on a patch of soft grass beneath Cressilia's arc, while scattered, helpless stars blink like half-asleep eyes. In that place, you are simply allowed to rest, while your chosen legendary keeps a quiet, unremarkable watch until morning, not needing to evolve, not needing to show off its power, just existing as a calm shape between you and the dark. When dawn eventually arrives, it will step back into its own myth, leaving you with the faint memory of a night guarded by something that asked nothing from you at all. For now, you can let your breathing slow, let the last facts blur, and let the legends fold themselves away until another night, when there will be many more stories to whisper through, and many more gentle, slightly disappointing guardians waiting to watch over your sleep.